Good morning, Senator Wong and Rep. Zullo.
Good morning.
I am just waiting. I know Senator Cassano was having some computer issues this morning, and I know he also has transportation at the same time, unfortunately. So just want to wait another minute or two to see if we can get him on, and but if not, we'll go ahead and start. So thanks for your patience, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes. Literally a couple. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for your patience this morning. Let me just check in. Mr. Clerk, are you good and ready?
Ma'am, all testimonies up.
Wonderful. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Planning and Development Committee hearing. It's wonderful to see everyone here with us today. Just a quick review of our Zoom logistics as we get ready to begin. And I'll then turn it over for brief remarks to our ranking members. But just a reminder to those speaking, if just for purposes of our recordings and for viewing at home, we have to make sure that we speak one at a time. And I'll ask that after a presenter is speaking, that if the members could please remember to use, as you've been so wonderful about using the raise hand function, which usually is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will call on folks from there. And sometimes we'll pause as I do, just to make sure that I'm seeing all the hands. If you are having an issue, please contact the clerk or myself, but not through the chat. I just remind folks to refrain from using the chat function since we're in a public meeting and the public doesn't have access to that. With that, I am going to ask Senator Wong and then Rep. Zullo for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I appreciate public hearing. It's an opportunity for people to voice their viewpoints and for us as the legislative body to hear their thoughts and be able to represent them. So thank you very much for the public hearing opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Zullo.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Just a remark in advance, I know that these are very difficult to administer, so a big thank you and shout out to Camillo and of course to you for all of your hard work that I know you're going to be doing today. And again, there are some real issues of consequence on today's public hearing agenda, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the public has to say.
Thank you, Senator Wong and Rep. Zullo. And just to confirm, Senator Cassano will be joining us and is having some technical difficulties, as is the case for many of us in this session. I will also add that there are a number of members, and this is true when we're in the building as well, who have multiple hearings occurring at the same time and will need to be in and out of our Zooms or toggling between screens as we are apt to do at this point. So just for those who are watching, know that that is what is happening. And in fact, our own co-chair, Senator Cassano, indeed co-chairs both transportation and planning and development, which are concurrently happening today. So it is, with that, a pleasure to be able to welcome our speakers today. One more final reminder, we do ask speakers to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. The first hour of the hearing will be reserved for public officials. And if we don't get through the entirety of our public officials list in that hour, we will then rotate back and forth between public officials and members of the public. And with that, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome as our first guest today, as our first witness and speaker, our treasurer, Connecticut State Treasurer, Sean Wooden. It's a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Representative McCarthy Vahey. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with you, and I am excited about this bill. Thank you to the members of the Planning and Development Committee for the opportunity to submit testimony and to be here in support of Senate Bill 867, an act concerning investment of certain municipal funds. I asked the committee to raise this bill in order to give municipalities a tool to be used in their discretion to save money and earn more on their investments. Currently, municipalities either participate in the Connecticut Municipal Employees Retirement System, or CMERS, pension plan, or they maintain their own standalone defined benefit pension plan. This bill would allow municipalities that do not participate in CMERS to choose to invest their pension funds with the Connecticut Retirement Plans and Trust Funds, or we call it CRPTF, which is the state's combined plans and trusts, which includes the teachers and state employees retirement systems and 9 trust funds. Giving municipal pension boards this option would provide them with access to asset classes and lower fees that would otherwise be inaccessible to them. As a former public pension investment attorney and a former city council president, I've given significant thought to this concept over a number of years. In fact, I moderated a panel discussion on this topic at the National Association of Public Pension Attorneys in 2018, and I've also co-authored an article analyzing similar models in US and Canada. Through my work, I've found that empowering municipal pension boards with the tools they need to enhance returns, lower administrative costs, and better manage risk improves pension fund performance over the long term. This bill offers such a tool to municipalities by allowing them to take advantage of economies of scale and reduced investment management fees. If a municipal board voluntarily elects to have its pension funds invested as part of the CRPTF, it would have access to a broader range of asset classes, increasing portfolio diversification, as well as return and risk mitigation opportunities. To be clear, this proposal is merely an option for municipalities, not a mandate. The invested municipal pension funds would not be available to the state to be appropriated in any way and could be moved out of the CRPTF by the municipality at any point. Moreover, this proposal is flexible enough to meet the different needs of the municipalities in that their funds can be invested in line with the asset allocations designed by local pension boards. Providing options and flexibility is especially important during these uncertain times. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 867. I urge the committee to act favorably and provide this important tool for municipal pension boards that do not participate in CMERS. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Treasurer Wooden. Great to see you.
Great to be with you again.
Thank you. Happy Friday. And listening to your presentation and reading the testimony that's been submitted by COST as well as CCM, in support of this bill. My question would first be, why didn't we do this earlier?
Um, you have to think about it, right? And without giving myself too much credit, it just so happens that you have a treasurer who's thought a lot about this outside of this context, right? And it's that combination of, I will never lose my municipal perspective of being on the ground, right? And always wishing we just had more tools from the state, from the federal government, just more tools that we could deploy and utilize to bring down our costs and kind of make our jobs easier. And so this is an opportunity to do it, but I wholeheartedly endorse your reaction in that it's simple enough to do. It's the cost to the state is de minimis, right? Because my staff, we're already investing on behalf of the state, so it's not increased cost for the state, and it's just it's something we should have done, and I'm going to continue to think about other ideas like this to help local communities.
Well, I'm happy to give you credit. I appreciate you raising this bill. I'm going to be the devil's advocate. What would be some of the concerns and pitfalls of this that we may not have noted that we could address?
Well, some of them, because I have written an article on this, which talked about some of those pitfalls. Some of the pitfalls are politics and notions of local control. And that's why, I wouldn't propose the state requiring this, although in Massachusetts, they do require municipalities in which their performance, their funded ratio, where they fall below a certain level of performance, they do require and mandate participation in something similar to this. But that's typically the issue. Also, which this doesn't touch, which is the administration of benefits, right? There's a strong argument that you want the administration of benefits to be local and closer to the beneficiaries. So this doesn't attempt to deal with benefits administration, just the investment side of the equation. So I've tried to avoid some of the pitfalls that have historically come up in other parts of the country.
And I appreciate that thought and consideration, because obviously we're going to address many issues in our committee related to that kind of state control versus local control. That being said, I think your proposal has one powerful caveat, is in your wisdom, you offer some opportunities for innovation, but you also put in a very important clause of an opt-in. And the opt-in is one where I know both CCM and COST cited has a huge plus that allows different municipalities under different circumstances to take advantage. And what I also see in you, and the challenge is, I am eager to read your article. I've gotten bits of it. Is when you cite Massachusetts bill puts incredible challenges in front of our urban cities in regards to meeting those pension obligations and liabilities, because they are heavily burdened. And in my years in the General Assembly, I know we've had to make some exceptions and allowing some carve outs for the challenges in our urban center. Your proposal is statewide, but it is an opt-in. Would you agree that that is one of the powerful buy-ins from all of our municipalities, particularly those two major representative ones, to say that this is a good idea? It is a collaborative effort, not a hammer, so to speak.
Yes. And it's one, since I've been in office, that I have talked to local communities about, just kind of testing out the idea before introducing it. And so I agree with you that that is a powerful feature, because there are high sensitivities with requiring local governments to do things mandated by the state.
And I do want to applaud you for addressing our pension liabilities for our cities and for our state. It is one of the crushing unheard, often unheard crisis that we have to deal with. And your innovation and your approach to collaboration and opt-in and trying to create solutions is one that I want to applaud you on and thank you. So I appreciate this, and I look forward to working this through the process. And thank you for your time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Winkler.
Yes, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
In Vernon, we have a defined benefit plan for the managers and the police, and we have a defined contribution plan for the staff. Would both funds or be able to join in this program, and would they do it separately or together?
The answer is both funds would be able to participate so long as the governing bodies for those respective funds both decide to do so. And it would be done separately because this is, even though we have a common asset and management pool, we still have segregation just to kind of protect different assets.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler, for that excellent question. I think that this is a tremendous proposal, and Treasurer Wooden, I also give you tremendous credit for this. We know that municipalities sometimes struggle. As you probably know, I put in a bill this session about providing some technical support to our municipalities that have those pensions of their own so that they would be able to get some help and input and advice on some of those things related to helping reduce fees, understanding investment policies, and all of those things. And that's why this is really a tremendous opportunity, because aggregating and pooling resources broadens it helps spread the risk, and it helps hopefully save costs. And just a couple questions for you. But before I do, the other comment about the DC versus the DV, the defined contribution, I think there are some municipalities that are still growing into that, right? As some folks switch from the defined benefit into the defined contribution. And I know there are federal regulations that govern what can be done with defined benefit plans, but there are some other questions related to the defined contribution and how the administration occurs within communities. So I think this is an area that I hope we will continue to talk about together. But for today, I just wanted to clarify something that you said in your testimony, that municipalities can choose to invest according to their investment policies. In other words, similar to when an individual makes an election when they're investing their funds in perhaps a 401k. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct. That flexibility is built in to take into account, it's not one size fits all in terms of the circumstances of the local pension system. And so the investment strategy or the allocation mix might be different in terms of desirability for different communities.
And then the other question I have would be with respect to cost to a municipality. So if, for example, a municipality did choose to opt in, I heard you say that it was de minimis within your office because you're already doing this work as part of the broader investment pool. Would there be a cost to a municipality for some of that administration? I mean, I would expect that there would be savings, but how would that part of the process work?
Yeah, any cost would what we call de minimis, and I try to get out of my legal speak, but yeah. So for certain things, there are administrative costs and fees that are essentially passed through, but those costs are dramatically lower because it's shared across a much larger asset pool.
Thank you for clarifying that. And particularly in this case, just so that people understand too, that cost would be borne by the pension trust as opposed to a town's operating budget. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Representative Zullo, I saw your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
The last thing you asked was what I was going to ask. So perfect. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Always appreciated, Rep. Zullo. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? Senator Wong for the second time.
Just a logistical question. Treasurer Wooden, did you submit your testimony? We don't see it in the record, and if not, if you could send a copy to the committee, that would be great.
So yes, it has been submitted.
Okay.
But
It is.
we can circulate another copy to the committee as well.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
yes, Mr. Treasurer, it's on the bill itself. If I see it posted, I know our clerk was actually working to get that posted this morning before you testified. It should be. I'm going between screens, so I had seen it earlier. So let's just double check and make sure, Mr. Clerk.
It's up. I'm looking at it right now.
Okay, good. Just so you can know that we do have it, but we can make sure that it gets out to members of the committee.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Treasurer, before you go?
No, I'm just excited about it and kind of laughing at myself a little bit. It's a small thing, but it's been important to me, and I was hoping that we got it done last year. And so I'm thrilled that you guys are back in session, and just look forward to answering questions and kind of moving this along. I think it's a great tool.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm grateful that you've brought it back to us again and hoping that we can get this passed this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next on our speaker list is Representative Devlin. Mr. Clerk, is Representative Devlin with us?
Yeah, she was right here in two. Oh, she's right here.
Wonderful. There she is. Good morning, Representative Devlin. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great to see the enthusiasm from our state treasurer. I love the joy that he was exuding in his testimony. But I am here to speak to you regarding SB 868, and I am really grateful to you, Chair McCarthy, Chairman Cassano, our Vice Chairs Needleman and Gupel, and also Ranking Members Huang and Zullo for raising this bill for a public hearing. If you would indulge me, I would like to yield my time to Christine Siegel. I am happy to answer any questions, but if the clerk could let her into the Zoom, I'd be happy to yield my time for her to make some comments.
So I am here, and I want to thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the committee, and especially thank you to Representative Devlin for yielding her time to me. I'm Christine Siegel, and I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and my husband, Don Siegel. We have also submitted written testimony for the committee's consideration. Don and I are both licensed mental health providers, so we recognize the important contribution that community residents, often called group homes, make to the lives of individuals and to the character of a community. We have seen firsthand the ways in which group homes have enhanced the quality of life for our clients. Also, we have an adult niece with special needs who is herself a group home resident. We are grateful for the opportunity Claire's group home provides her to live in an age-appropriate setting with supports to be as self-sufficient as possible and to be a member of her community. So given these professional and personal experiences, Don and I have a strong interest in and offer our support for State Bill 868. As we understand it, the bill proposes language that would clarify the definition of a community residence in our existing state regulations. By specifying what is, and more importantly, what is not a group home, the proposed language would limit the spread of those facilities that are not truly community residences. Most importantly, it would prevent for-profit medical facilities that do not offer the stable housing that is characteristic of a group home from co-opting designation as a community residence. For-profit medical facilities have as their primary purpose the generation of revenue and thus benefit from short-term residential stays. In contrast, group homes have as their primary purpose long-term housing stability for their occupants, who then become integrated members of their communities. Additionally, the proposed language stipulates that community residences qualify for state funding through the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Such state funding is accompanied by regulatory oversight regarding fee structures and quality of care that will further limit for-profit businesses from operating as group homes. Finally, the proposed language excludes facilities that require a certificate of need from obtaining group home status. This exclusion distinguishes group homes, which are designed for long-term residents, from medical facilities that have as their primary purpose the delivery of healthcare services, which could require little or no residential experience. Taken together, the exclusion of for-profit facilities, the requirement for state funding, and/or the exclusion of certificate of need facilities helps to clarify the unique features and primary purposes of group homes. So, as we understand it, the proposed language of State Bill 8668 upholds fair housing protection specifically for community residences. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. It's very nice to see you. I wasn't
Good to see you.
expecting you. So forgive me for being surprised, but I'm going to turn it over Senator Wong and then Rep. Arnone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Dr. Siegel, and welcome, Representative Devlin. If I may, through you, Madam Chair, ask Representative Devlin if she could articulate her rationale for raising the bill. And I know she is a strong advocate of her community that may be impacted by this said proposal. But can you offer your perspective as a state legislator looking at as a champion of group homes and protected communities to kind of articulate this clarification? Ms. Devlin.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. And let me be perfectly clear and straight from the get-go. The intent of this legislation is in no means to obstruct the operation or the installation, if you will, of group homes by providers that clearly fit the protections of 83E. But it will provide much needed clarification to prevent corporations from establishing these, lavish residential medical treatment facilities, if you will, that they benefit from with extraordinary profits. And what's interesting as well for this committee, I think that for zoning, which is a matter that you all have cognizant of, companies that misrepresent themselves specifically to seek a change of use in a residential property under a particular name, and then use a different name to follow a process that group homes don't do. It's not required, which is to get a certificate of need. They are blatantly bypassing the regulations that are in place, and I would think this committee would be quite alarmed at that.
Thank you for that clarification, and I appreciate that. Dr. Siegel, as a mental health professional, we are in the throes of a very challenging environment, and mental health has been discussed many a times. And we also have the incredible challenge of substance abuse and addiction as part of our current culture, which is an incredible challenge. And your background in that area, your articulation of this definition clarification is in no way undermining the importance of mental health support, substance abuse support. And I like for you to articulate the the tremendous difference in the rationale of the concept of this language of 8-3E, which purports to support community homes and group home dynamics, and why it's so different than the parties that may be taking advantage of this. And this is in no way looking to undermine the importance and the support that's necessary in mental health and substance abuse and addiction and any of our protected classes. Can you articulate a little bit more about that distinction that you have in regards to the definition of this versus the importance that we all place as a broader community on support of mental health and substance abuse, addiction, and any of the protected class?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Wong, for that question and that opportunity. I think I'm particularly focused on, the unique features of a group home and what that provides and the type of individuals who benefit most from a group home. These are individuals who, due to a range of disabilities or impairments, are not able to be fully independent as adults, but require some supports to live as self-sufficiently as possible for long-term in communities. And I think long-term is the key here, that these are people who for years, like my niece Claire, would exist in a community, become part of the fabric of that community and residencies. It is one option within a range of services, health and mental health provided. Other types of services are shorter term or more transient. There certainly is a need for, as you said, addiction support services among the range of mental health needs that we have. And those are more transient. They could be 6 months, 2 year, 18 months. And people move in and out of those and then on to live in other communities. And it's my understanding this language serves to distinguish those two types of treatments and supports, and also two types of populations needing services.
Senator, could I also address that for a minute, if you wouldn't mind?
Absolutely, Representative Devlin.
Just to, I think, tap onto what Christine was saying, right? Group homes are just that, they're homes. The residents of those homes, that's where they live, and they are intended to be able to integrate into a community. They go to school, they go to work, they go to the library, and they come home to their group home facility. These medical treatment facilities, which are required or limited even by insurance for whatever insurance they may take, is very limited. These people leave their home, they go to a treatment facility for treatment, and then they go home. But let me add, this is not at all about whether or not there is a need for treatment, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the article today, I think it was in the Connecticut Mirror. And this committee is fairly sizable. I will share that my family has directly had impact of the loss of life due to opioid addiction. And as one of those statistics, I would imagine we're not alone. This touches so many people. But the point of this legislation is to be able to prevent companies, major for-profit companies that come in to states like ours where there may be gray areas and specifically take advantage of those. The laws are intended to provide clear guardrails and clear rules. And that's what SB 868 would provide. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative Devlin. And I'm so appreciative of the emotion that you expressed and the passion you have in clearly defining this. And what is clear to me is, and through Dr. Siegel, that you are incredibly aware and supportive of mental health, substance abuse, and the protected populations. Let me be a devil's advocate, if I may, for those that said, they don't want it in specific neighborhoods and that there's a challenge. Let me ask of that from the standpoint of what would you say to people to say, your just reaction to protecting your quote neighborhood. What would you say to the substance of this bill in the clear distinction of the language and the definition to a protected community home or group home dynamic? What would you answer to the critics that would say, goodness gracious, you're just only interested in your neighborhood?
So
Through
Tony,
You,
I-
Representative Devlin.
Oh, fine. I'm happy to address that. Also let me state that when these companies did come in to purchase these residential homes to create these luxury treatment centers, right? It was in a very down real estate market. But the reality is group homes have protections. And within the community where there are proposed 2 medical treatment facilities that have taken advantage of this law and quite frankly, fraudulently represented themselves to get a change of use and then went to seek a con. I'm sure you're all familiar with the laws, the protective laws, but there are also some limitations in terms of distance that certain group homes can be from one another, density within a community, and they take away from that. And in fact, near one of these homes, a family does have plans to turn their home into a group home to support one of their children to have a place that they can live successfully. This isn't about not in my backyard. This is about protections for legitimate populations that are intended to be protected by laws. And it's about major for-profit companies that are bypassing those protections, violating zoning laws to be able to profit lavishly from this crisis that we are seeing not only in our local communities across our state and across our country.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And what even brought it further to my attention and this committee's attention is in our previous public hearing, we had a taxation issue of our nonprofit group homes with our local municipalities. That inspired a lot of engagement, a lot of conversations, and the purpose. And I remember distinctly for all the advocates like the Kennedy Center, Oak Hill, and all the really tremendous nonprofit organizations that host group homes, that they're doing it as a residence for a protected population. And the distinction that was struck to me is they are fulfilling an important public mission in creating a home environment for the protected population, and they coexist as residents in a home in that community. And we talked a lot about the tax exemption requirement with our municipalities, and that really struck home with me is the fact that the distinction with clarifying this definition is the point of nonprofit for-profit entities, entities that do not require any subsidies of federal or state funding, and require certificate of need. Those 3 criterias are distinctly different than what I heard in our last public hearing from the group home advocates that are looking for tax exemption. So I appreciate your clarity on that and further distinguishing and why this statute is necessary for clarifying the definition of group homes as we explore tax exemption statuses and things to that effect. Let me close by simply saying it is important for me to hear and reiterate for the advocates of this bill, in both you, Representative Devlin, and Dr. Siegel, that mental health, substance abuse, and the protected class is absolutely essential and critical to the mission of what we have as a community. And you support that idea. Would that be correct?
that is correct. And I would also like to take the opportunity to address the not in my backyard question that you proposed, Senator Wong, if I may. Personally, I'd say the biggest nuisance in my backyard right now are the deer who are eating the grass. But I think I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the benefits, not only for the individuals of group homes, but for the communities in which a group home exists, and the research literature in psychology is pretty clear on that, that group homes as homes for long-term residents do have a benefit on the community. The community becomes more inclusive, more diverse. It is sensitized to the needs of individuals with disabilities. It provides opportunities for volunteerism, and in essence becomes a more caring community. So group homes that are truly group homes not only benefit the individual residents of those homes, but the communities. I think Representative Devlin has made a good point about for-profit corporate entities coming into communities. They would have a different purpose, and in my mind, would not have that benefit on the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel. I'm trying to do multitask. I apologize.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you very much for both of you for your time and testimony. I want to thank the Madam Chair for her indulgence of time as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Arnone, followed by Rep. Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the good senator too, you got half of my question answered. I appreciate that for time on the difference. How about some examples of these residential living centers and what we're calling medical treatment centers? Could they be luxury retirement homes? Can they be nursing homes? Is there specific examples that we could kind of draw by to see these things when we drive around?
So could you just repeat your question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so specific examples of the treatment centers that you're, you call them residential living centers and medical treatment centers. So for example, could they be retirement communities, luxury retired communities, nursing homes? Could they take advantage of this law right now?
So my understanding is that I don't know that any of those facilities would go to a municipality and, having purchased a single family home, would go under a different name and say they are going to change the use of this property to an R4 group home, and then turn around and go to the Office of Health Strategy to get a certificate of need. So I don't know that they would try to intentionally violate the protections that are offered for the protected classes that group home fair housing laws are intended to provide. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. But as the more I read about taking advantage of these laws, and you was talking about the large corporations that have been taking advantage of these laws for luxury purposes, for profit. And I was just looking for the specific kinds of, not the companies that are doing it, but the kind of work they're doing. But that's good. I'll take it what I Googled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Winkler.
Yes, Representative Devlin, good to see you again.
Always good to see you, Representative Winkler.
So this bill would not prevent nonprofits from establishing group homes under current legislation.
So an organization that is going to establish a group home that is going to accept Demas funding and oversight would certainly. In fact, the companies that have purchased homes and have, under the guise of a group home, to turn around and turn it into something that is not a group home, could very well turn them into group homes. Yes, it does not prevent the establishment of group homes, and that is not the intent of this legislation. It is to provide the clarity that is lacking, so that major corporations that have certainly the resources can't and take advantage and violate the zoning laws that this committee has cognizance of.
Now, when you say accept Demas funding, does that mean that everybody in the group home is like on Husky, or is that some other type of funding?
Not every individual would need to do that. No, not at all.
But if the residents in general, the majority or whatever, were on Husky, would that meet the definition of accepts Demas funding?
I believe that Husky is part of that. I may be wrong. Medicaid is certainly an aspect that is, part of that. So I hope that helps.
The definition then isn't like narrow to a specific Demas fund or a specific source of funding.
So the specific bill language, and let me call that up for you. States that so this is the clarification that would be put in place, that community residents do not include private for-profit medical facilities, right? Medical facilities, a facility that receives no funding from Demas, so that's very broad, and also is required, is not, so a group home is not required to pursue and be awarded a certificate of need. That is something for a medical treatment facility, much like I think Rep. Arnone was speaking to, related to a nursing home or some other medical facility.
Okay. And the point I'm trying to just get to is, let us say that a group home exists, if you will, on the payments made on behalf of an individual by Demas, or made to the individual who then transfers it to Demas, would they qualify as legitimate group homes under your bill?
So that is a real good question. I'm honestly not an expert in that aspect. Senator Wong may be able to address that as well. So happy to look into that for you and speak to Demas to get more clarification. I think the important thing is that guardrails and clarity is put in place so that companies, there is certainly a booming need for services, and for companies to be able to intentionally violate existing laws intended to provide protections should be, those violations, those loopholes, if you will, should be closed. And this is an opportunity to be able to do that.
And this, of course, would not prevent a municipality from hearing a zoning variance request or something on behalf of a home that was for profit and wanted to establish in the community, as long as it met all of the requirements and approvals of the municipality.
So if zoning was changed, absolutely, right? I mean, you can't buy a single family home and turn it into an ice cream shop. You can't buy a single family home and turn it into a gas station. There are zoning laws, as you well know, being part of this committee, right? So the goal of this is to protect those who are intended to be protected under the existing 8.3E statute. And if a municipality rezoned itself to allow a medical treatment facility, great. And there are places, plenty of places, where medical treatment facilities are currently allowed within zoning. And I did also just want to clarify to your earlier point that regarding Demas funding, I believe that all individuals must be in Medicaid in order to get Demas funds. But again, I am, happy to work with you, Representative Winkler, to seek greater clarification from Demas.
Alrighty. I've been an admirer of yours since our spirited conversations on the GAE. And when somebody like you says preventing for-profit corporations, I know that it's a serious issue, and it's not something that just comes naturally to you, and I respect your judgment. So thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I always look forward to an opportunity to partner with you.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Senator Wong for the second time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the second time, but I was hoping to be able to answer some of the particular questions. For Representative Arnone, if I may, the examples he was looking for, I could cite a couple. For example, Newport Academy would be one such entity that is a for-profit entity that has made applications, has a community group home. Those communities in which they have articulated this protected federal and in state of Connecticut statute are in McLean, Virginia, and in the state of Connecticut, they have two such facilities in Darien, Connecticut, as well as in Bethlehem, Connecticut. And those kind of applications were taken under the premise of a group home application. Now, this state has an incredible history of a protected nature in regards to this statute of community group homes, because it was a case nearly, I think 35, 40 years ago of McKinney Foundation versus the town of Fairfield, in which a foundation was looking to provide hospice residence for individuals impacted by HIV. And they fought the town and they said, this is a protected group and this is a residence. So as a result of that landmark case, the town and many of our towns in Connecticut have supported the idea of group home applications as a protected class. So you really didn't think much about it. It really is an exception in our local planning and zoning authorities in approval. And that's where the crux of the frustration is, that there are entities that do not fit the mission of the nonprofit, the mission of a home-based, community-based environment, filing applications in our local planning and zoning board to get that exemption that is inconsistent with the language of the statute and the intent of that statute, in my humble opinion. And it isn't just Newport Academy. I know for me as a state senator for Fairfield, there are many other residences that apply those entities, not just Newport Academy. There is a weight loss organization that made the application as a group home, that is a transitional medical facility that went into a residence. And to be honest with you, most of our local municipalities are in nature protective of that sacred protection and exemption, and they never even debated it. And so what we're trying to address are entities that violate, in my belief, the spirit and the noble intention of this exemption, and to do it for a for-profit entity. And I'll give you a case in point. In the case that I cited in Newport Academy, they promote themselves, as you said, kind of a luxury to the tune of literally $1,000 a day payment that does not require any insurance and any supportive services. And their niche is, they started in Newport, California. And the model is truly to go into residential neighborhoods and provide these kind of transitional medical facilities that do require a certificate of need. The tax exempt properties that you talked about from those nonprofits that we heard nearly 2 weeks ago in our public hearing, none of them are for profit, and none of them require, and well, I will say that some of them, but they are not one that is exclusively requirement of a certificate of need. I hope that answers it. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence to be able to clarify the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Wong. And I heard Representative Arnone saying thank you. I'll be a little bit of a stickler with that, just because, again, for the screen, having watched some of the other public hearings, it can be tough for people. So Senator Wong, thank you. Are there any further questions among members of the committee? Seeing and hearing none, Representative Devlin, thank you for being here with us today. And Dr. Siegel, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for joining us today and for your articulate testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Appreciate your time and indulgence today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have next on our agenda, we have Martin Heft from the Office of Policy and Management. And seeing as we're nearing that 1 hour mark, once after Mr. Heft's testimony, we will be going back and forth between members of the public and primary elected officials. So Mr. Heft, it's wonderful to have you here today, and welcome. Please proceed.
Good morning. Thank you. Chairs, ranking members, honorable members of the Planning and Development Committee. I'm Martin Heft, acting Undersecretary at the Office of Policy and Management. OPM supports Bill 870 to implement the recommendations concerning property tax exemptions, special taxing districts, neglected cemeteries, revaluation, property tax assessment and appeals, application of the state plan for conservation and development, tax overpayment refunds, tax collection, and the elimination of the municipal requirements relating to fiscal disparities, and the pilot on alternative commercial assessment methods. The bill includes several amendments that are purely technical in nature to correct errors, omissions, obsolete law, or provide uniformity with existing practice. I have provided full written testimony outlining each of the 21 sections of the bill. Besides those technical changes, Section 4 limits the requirements of state agencies to seek OPM advisory report on the extent to which the proposed action is consistent with the policies of the State Plan of Conservation and Development, to only those occasions when such an action is also subject to the early public scoping requirement of the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act. Section 7 aligns and establishes revaluation zones utilizing the existing 9 regional council of government boundaries aggregated into 5 new geographic zones. By aligning the geographic regions by reevaluation year, it provides municipalities the ability to benefit from the economies of scale when contracting for revaluation services. There is no mandate to conduct a revaluation with another municipality, and current statutes already provide for this as a local option. Additionally, sections 11 and 12 are consistent with Senate Bill 695 regarding contingency agreements for expert testimony in certain tax appeals that this committee heard in public hearing with OPM supportive testimony. I would like to just note that when the bill was raised, the Legislative Commissioner's Office made changes that are not consistent with OPM's recommendations or inadvertently removed some current language. Those are sections 5, 18, and 19. I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. And with me today, I have my Assistant Director, Dan Morley, Associate Fiscal Administrative Officer, Patrick Sullivan, and our Municipal Assessment Professional, Jennifer Gauthier. We are happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heft. There's a lot here in this bill. And I appreciate your testimony, your written testimony, which I would also refer members of the committee to review, and your testimony here today. Now we'll have a few questions beginning with Senator Wong, but before I recognize Senator Wong, I just want to note that we've been joined by Co-Chair Cassano, who I know, as I said, has multiple meetings today as well. So Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome back, Senator Cassano. Martin, welcome. Thank you for the good work that you do in the OPM office and prior to the Lieutenant Governor's office. Just on Section 18, when you talk about the veterans exemption, can you clarify a little bit about it's eliminating the two-step process and going directly citing to go to the collectors? Would that help with expediting these kind of error corrections on behalf of our veterans? Is that the rationale?
The rationale is actually the current language doesn't allow for the tax collector to process a payment. Everything's listed under the assessor. So, and the assessor doesn't process the payment. That has to come through the tax collector side.
Has that caused some challenges for our veterans to to be able to get that exemption certificate error corrected by your experience? Is that why?
Oh,
Mr. Heft, your microphone's muted.
my apologies. My
Join the
apologies as
club.
well, Senator, sorry. Section 18, I apologize. This is the certificate of error, correct?
Yes.
So tax collectors are not currently certified to determine the eligibility. That comes from the assessor side. For that, the statute revision would require the veteran to seek the eligibility status through the assessor, and then the assessor processes a certificate of change for that, and then the tax collector can then process any overpayment to make that refund. So it's clarifying the process because it's a two-step process, partly by the assessor, partly by the tax collector.
Okay, and I guess the question was, were there examples of certificate of error claims clarification that have been held up because of this lack of clarification? I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we're addressing an important problem. If it is, that would obviously be very important to me to ensure that our veterans get the necessary refunds that are as a result of an error quicker and more effectively.
Correct. Part of this deals with that right now, the documentation is not there for the refunds to happen. So this, allows the refund to be issued lawfully. Under current statutes, it's not clear. So that's why this is kind of revision and bringing it up to what the actual process is and being utilized. So it's not necessarily that someone's missing out on a benefit. It's just the clarity to make sure that the process is done correctly.
Thank you. And I have you spoken to the assessors and the tax collectors advocacy groups to get their input on this process change?
Yes, we actually work with the Assessors Association and the Tax Collectors Association. Most of the tax references in our sections here have come from the Connecticut Tax Collectors Association asking for these changes. And obviously, as part of our intergovernmental unit, we work with both assessment and taxation. So we were happy to bring those forward to add that clarity and make these recommendations.
Thank you. And section 18, your language articulated the reinsertion of the renter's rebate extension. You said it was inadvertently removed. Was that removed from many years past as a result of a budgetary omnibus bill? And is the OPM office looking to correct that? Because it seems to be a hefty bit of language, and I don't believe it went through a legislative process review, and I'm very supportive of this, but could you give a little background, or maybe it's not within your tenure there, but inadvertently removed and seems kind of, I just looking for a little more clarification on that. It's a very good idea.
Yes, no, thank you, Senator. And just for quick reference, in the written testimony, I noticed that should state section 19 for the renter's rebate. So
okay.
Instead of 18. But on the renter's rebate, it was, that is current language that was omitted. That is current language that is in the statutes now. When this bill was prepared for P&D, inadvertently, that whole section did not get carried forward. So it's already current language. We're not asking for anything new to be put in, but if you remove it, we're not able to make the payments.
Okay. So will we get a new testimony with that clarification to replace the current one?
Thank you, Senator. That clarification is in there. The only problem with the testimony was that it had the wrong section number listed on it. But I could definitely correct that if need be.
Because there are many others that may not be part of this testimony or even within the committee that will refer to this document, and I just wanted that point of clarification. Thank you, Mr. Heft, for your very good work in the OPM office, and please extend my appreciation to Secretary McCall, OPM Secretary McCall, for her good work as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Cassano, it's wonderful to see you. Your microphone is muted, Senator.
Been back and forth here. A quick follow-up question. I understand it's a two-step process. How does that carried out? As a veteran, if I go in and I have to go through the assessor's office and get their approval, then I have to wait till you've given me a decision and then I've got to go back to the tax collector? Or is there a system where the assessor would automatically forward the approval on to the tax collector, which would be a lot easier for the veteran?
Thank you, Senator. Good morning. It is actually the second half of what you stated. The assessor would issue a certificate of correction that gets forwarded to the tax collector, so the taxpayer or the veteran would not have to come in twice. It's done one time, and then it's a paperwork follow through.
That's an example of government working right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cassano. Mr. Heft, I just wanted to just note that we will certainly work with you in terms of the language clarifications to be sure that we're all on the same page, quite literally, right? And the same line with the same words and work together. I should just give a special thanks to our LCO attorneys who have been working very diligently and are juggling a lot of bills from all of us here in P&D and in other committees as well. I wanted to ask you just to talk a little bit more about the revaluation zones and the timelines. I know that there are a lot of sections to the bill and a lot of technical changes, but I wondered if you could just flesh that out a little bit more for us in terms of how that works, and to the point of, have you been talking with the towns, with the assessors about this as well? I know in your role you do talk with these groups all the time, but specifically on this issue, I'd love if you could articulate that for us.
Thank you, Representative. More than happy to. Several years ago, some members here may remember that House Bill 7192 was introduced by the governor, looking at revaluation, a number of different areas with that. So from that, OPM actually started a regional assessment work group, which was made up of Council of Governments and assessors, as well as OPM staff. This work group's been very instrumental in working with OPM on revaluation as well as other assessment issues. We are still meeting to date, 2 years later, continuing looking at motor vehicle assessments, looking at GIS, looking at a number of different areas. We've discussed the revaluation. This was actually part of our proposal last year. And actually going through the work group, we eliminated certain sections of other assessment consolidation back office and everything from our original proposal, from having met with them and discussing, concerns and options for that. So we have worked very well together with them. I know that their legislative committee on the assessor's side, I spoke with John Chaponis last night. They have not submitted any testimony of this, but they are in support of this change. They do see this as an administrative change, or excuse me, as a policy decision change, not an administrative change. He's been very pleased, as I mentioned, with the regional work group, that we've listened to concerns, made adjustments for that. We have 4 members actually of their legislative team that actually work on this regional work group. The thing to remember with this is that this is no mandate at all to any municipality. What this is doing is taking the regional council of government boundaries, if you will, and there's a map in the testimony showing those 5 regions that we plan to set up out of the 9 COGs. So what this does is it takes all of those municipalities within that COG region, that their assessment reevaluation date for October 1st will all come due on the same year. This will help provide excuse me, a larger parcel set to use in contracting for revaluation services. The municipality, as I said, already has the option to contract with another municipality to do revaluation services. But part of the problem is that their neighboring towns are not on the same cycle, so they cannot go through and contract with them. So this gives them the option to be able to do so. in that. I will state that take West COG, the Western Region COG, Section 1, which is in, would be our first one. There's 18 municipalities in that region. Currently, 14 of them are already on the same year. So this plan only will change 4 of those towns to coincide with the other 14 already that are up on the same year. So that provides a few more towns that if they want to go through and do this. So I would recommend looking at this as a geographic look at revaluation, because it's just aligning the municipalities around each other to be able to reval at the same time to create a better economies of scale, to create better data sets. And if there are further questions, Jennifer may be able to answer some further as our assessment professional, if we can answer something further for you, Representative.
Mr. Heft, thank you for that answer and just the information about the time that has been invested in the conversation that has been happening with multiple layers of government. It's really appreciated to give the context, especially for our newer members, so that folks understand. I would love to just dig into the why a little bit more, and you touched on that at the end of what you just said. Creating economies of scale and better data. And I wondered if Ms. Gauthier, if you would be willing to speak to that, if I may, or Mr. Heft, or anyone else from the team about that, why this is important and helpful to our communities.
Sure. Jennifer, would you like to start on that and then I'll add into it? Thank you.
Sure. Currently, we have 169 municipalities and we have a 5-year revaluation cycle. So there are a number of towns that go each particular year. In 2018, we had 46 revals. In 2019, we had 13. So what we've done is we've tried to parse that out and make it even so that there's about 30 to 40 in every year. And we've also calculated out the number of parcels that would go every year to make it more uniform. So we did that by COG, and then we set out the revaluation schedule by year. So we've spanned it out over 15 years for everybody to come onto the same cycle. These economies of scale, we have anywhere between 200,000 and 300,000 parcels to go every year. And with that, we could share sale data. We could share all kinds of staff from different revaluation companies across municipal lines to make better valuations. For instance, if you're in a small town and you have a sand and gravel pit that's sold, you might have your reval company might know somebody else in another neighboring town that had a sale that you could use to help justify that, not only for your values, but also for Board of Assessment appeals or potential litigation. So that is the reason we've done it by zone, and we've parsed it out so that it's much more stable. There's not those spikes in the number of revaluations per year.
Thank you for that answer. You're speaking to spikes in the number and stabilizing it, but you're also talking about getting fair and accurate data for our property owners who are being revaluated, and their tax payment is based on that. So that's a very clear and specific reason where there's potential benefit to the taxpayers of Connecticut with this move. Mr. Heft, did you want to add anything to that?
No, not at this time.
Thank you so much for those answers and for your testimony. Are there other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I want to thank the entire OPM team here today with you, and Mr. Heft again emphasized that we will be continuing to work together to make sure that we have the language of this bill right, so that we can move it forward through the process. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And looking at our list today, I believe, just making sure I have this right, next on the list would be Mr. Gaffney, to be followed by Mr. Chris. And for those of you who are in the queue and waiting to speak, I appreciate your patience. And as we toggle back and forth, Thank you very much.
Mr.
So
Gaffney,
is Mr. Gaffney here with us, Mr.
Uh,
Clerk?
Mr. Gaffney's not here, but Mr. Chris was.
Mr. Chris, great. So Mr. Chris, if you are prepared, we would love to hear your testimony. Welcome. Please proceed, sir.
Hello. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the entire committee for listening to testimony today on important bills and making this work during these difficult times. So it's great to see you. I wish I could see you all in person, but I'm here to testify on behalf of House Bill 6421 and House Bill 6418 on behalf of the Town of Harwinton and CCM. Briefly on House Bill 6418, an act concerning abandoned and blighted property receivership. As you know, during Public Act 19-92 was established a receivership program, and that receivership program limited to the thresholds to communities with 35,000 or more. We are a small community out in obviously Litchfield County, Connecticut, and we are probably one of just a few towns that adopted blight ordinances over the years. We've had one since December 2016, and we've been working diligently to try to clean up foreclosed abandoned bank properties, which have basically have been abandoned by the banks and the management companies and left as eyesores in our community. And that was our main focus of why we established this ordinance in our community at the time. We're supporting this bill because we would like that threshold lifted out to allow small communities like ours to take advantage of the receivership program when we run across these properties and we are not getting much movement on it. It gives us that mechanism in order to take action against these properties and get these into receivership, hopefully get them cleaned up, and hopefully increase the values of the homes in those areas and make the neighborhoods more safe. By not being able to do this, this actually is a loss in tax revenue on these homes, as you know, as houses depreciate and they fall out of repair. It's less tax revenue for the communities and continues to devalue the homes within our communities. So we're in support of that bill. And to touch briefly on House Bill 6421, CCM and the Town of Harwinton are opposed to this bill. This is an act concerning the continuation of retirement allowances for certain retirees upon subsequent employment by a Board of Education. I've submitted testimony on both of these bills. The reason why we're opposing these bills is because this bill seeks to permit retired public safety personnel to receive retirement allowances if such personnel are employed by a local or regional Board of Education in a public safety capacity after retirement. This proposal does not include any state long-term assistance compounding costs for local governments who under this bill would be paying pension and salary to the same employees simultaneously. Long ago, the state of Connecticut abandoned the SRO programs, and the towns basically created their own funding these programs. But additionally, under the bill, the retiree employee could potentially become eligible for another lucrative pension while employed under the provisions promulgated by the bill. This bill would squeeze the balloon and inflate costs, particularly for MERS towns. And the MERS contribution rates for employees have largely remained the same since the system was established, controlling it between 2.25% and 5%. Over the years, the Municipal Employee Retirement Fund has been actuarially evaluated. Municipal employer contribution rates have been steadily increased to ensure adequate funding and solvency. So recently, the assumed rate of return on the MERF was reduced from 8 to 7, and this creates a significant funding gap. As a result,
Mr. Chris,
municipalities, yes.
if you could just wrap up, that would be wonderful.
Yep. Accordingly, the Town of Harwinton CCM is asking for the ability. We're basically asking you to create a new tier within MERS that would exclude overtime from retirement benefit calculations, increase the retirement age to 62, limit the cost of living increase of between 0 and 2%, and increase employee contributions.
Thank you, Mr. Chris, for your testimony today. Are there questions from members of the committee? Representative Winkler.
Yes, I read the bill differently, and I would just ask, number one, the municipality would be in control. They could simply not hire the person. Is that correct?
Not the way I understand the bill. I don't think it'll, well, I mean, obviously employment is up to the discretion of the employer.
Right,
Obviously. So yes,
okay. And the bill seems to state specifically, or the one, the reason for the bill as I see it is to clarify that they would not qualify for time served in a municipal pension plan if they were rehired. Do you read it that way?
I don't. I took it as to read as that basically it would allow them to compound that going forward and add to that time without the new tier in place.
Okay, we read the bill differently, and I will, rather than spend
And
time
this is,
trying to figure out which one of us is right now, we'll go back and study the bill. Thank you.
no,
Thank you.
I appreciate it, Representative. And just so you're aware, it is the Board of Ed that has the choice of employment, not the municipality. So unfortunately, we don't have much control over the Board of Ed. But again, you were right with that when you said that, so.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Representative Zullo, followed by Representative Arnone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add in that for the record, I read the bill the way Representative Winkler does, that the person may continue to collect but does not accrue additional credit for the period of that subsequent employment. But again, rather than continue to eat up time, I'll just check with the person who's introducing the amendment to confirm that that was the intent. And if there's a need to clear that up, we'll try to do that. But I recognize the concerns you've raised, and if there are those concerns, we'll address them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Zullo, and I concur. That is certainly a concern, and it is not my interest in doing that as well. I think this was brought forward in an effort to allow for a broader pool of folks to be hired into those school systems. Representative Arnone.
Quickly, at the end of your testimony, you mentioned increasing the employee contribution on the pension to the state, the MERS. We did that a year ago. A year and a half ago, we did increase employees' contributions, just to get the record out for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
I wanted to, Mr. Chris, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I know the questions have focused on 6421, but I wanted to highlight also 6418, the receivership bill, and very much appreciate you being here with us to discuss it. When we passed this bill, in an effort to get it passed that year, there was a desire to have a population threshold on it. I have been supportive from the beginning of allowing every opportunity in our state to have these tools in their toolbox, so to speak, to allow for ongoing tax revenue, to deal with blight, to be able to create, safe and accessible communities. And I think that's what this bill would allow all communities to do. So I appreciate you taking the time to highlight that for us. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Chris.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Mr. Clerk, I do see Mr. Edge here in the Zoom room with us, and I don't believe I see Mr. Gaffey, so I'd like to, Mr. Edge, welcome you, and please proceed, sir.
Thank you so very much. Senator Cassano, Representative McCarthy Vahey, Senator Huang, Representative Zullo, and other distinguished members of the Planning and Development Committee. I am the Economic Development Director for the town of Berlin and an advocate of creative reuse of properties as well as non-traditional solutions to move communities ahead. The General Assembly was very forward-thinking by allowing receivership in communities of 35,000 residents or more. While this is wonderful communities of that size, it does leave behind communities like Berlin, who has 20,000 residents. The issue of vacant, dilapidated, and blighted properties is not just a big city or large community one. You'll find properties that have not been touched in many years in our towns and others, both small sizes and larger. I would ask that you seriously consider the importance of moving this legislation to the floor for a vote, and it would provide professionals like myself at the municipal level an additional tool to move ahead our community through redevelopment of properties that seem at present to have no viable future. Thank you so much for your time today, and I appreciate you doing it this way. Again, this is House Bill 6418, just to go on what Mr. Chris had just stated.
Thank you, Mr. Edge. We appreciate both your clarity and brevity. Are there questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, I also would like to thank you for taking the time to be here. I do think you're right that this was forward thinking, and I actually want to give credit to Donna Hamsey of CCM and Laura Settlemeyer, who was with the Hartford Land Bank at the time, who were two of the folks who came to the committee and convinced us pretty quickly that this was something that we should get done. So thank you for being here with us today. And
well, thank you. If I could add just one quick thing, I think this is important because it also piggybacks on the programs the state have done on putting brownfield funding out there. Sometimes the properties that are there, the receivership and the nonprofits, so either for-profit or municipalities are not in the mix of the ownership. I think this is vitally important. It takes two different things that the legislature has done together. So thank you so much.
thank you, and I appreciate you pointing that out. It's true that there's never one blanket solution for the issues that we're facing, and we need to have a number of different ones. And you're right, that's a good compliment that you pointed out. Thank you so much, Mr. Edge. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. You as well. Everyone have a great and safe weekend.
And Mr. Clerk, am I correct that Mr. Gaffney is?
I'm still looking for him, but I don't see either the attendees or the.
Wonderful. So Mr. Clerk, why don't you just send me a text when he does arrive? And I do see that Mr. Alvarez from the City of New Haven is with us, and we welcome you. Please proceed, Mr. Alvarez.
Thank you so much. Representative McCarthy-Vahey, Senator Cassano, Ranking Members Wong and Zullo, members of the committee. My name is Kevin Alvarez. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the City of New Haven. And I'm here to speak in respectful opposition to Senate Bill 869, an act concerning community investment boards and neighborhood assistance. The intention of this bill seems to try and bring more community input into the process of local governance, which is, of course, something we all strive to achieve. The problem, however, is that this is not the way to achieve it, and that it would have severe adverse effects on the residents of our city. As it currently reads, it appears city governments would only be able to control 1/3 of the funds received by the state, and that unelected boards appointed by the chief executive would control millions of dollars in state revenue. The hyper-local nature of our state is already a severely inefficient impediment providing services to residents, and this would effectively make it impossible for communities like New Haven to even create a budget. New Haven elects our mayor and 30 members of our board of alders, representing every neighborhood in the city. They work together to create an annual budget that is already strapped by severe underfunding of Pilot, MRSA, and ECS. This proposal would essentially take over $40 million in current state aid, roughly the same size as our entire police department, out of our budget and give it authority to individuals who weren't elected to oversee its spending. There is a proposal that would come before the legislature to dramatically increase municipal funding through Pilot to towns and cities, rural, urban, and suburban, which has broad bipartisan support, and I would urge that you support that measure and others like it to truly benefit the residents of our state. We're eager to work with any member of this committee or the General Assembly on ways to engage more people in the democratic process, get more community buy-in, and make our state more equitable. This is not the way to do it, but we appreciate that folks are bringing ideas forward to try and do right by the residents we serve. And then just personally, I look forward to being back before this committee to testify in support of some of the proposals I know will be coming before you this session, and I'm grateful for your time and happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Alvarez, and for your good work on behalf of the City of New Haven. Senator Wong, followed by Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Alvarez, for joining us. I'm just double checking. You cited some numbers, and I just was looking to get the testimony. If you've not submitted testimony, if you could share that with the committee, because I don't see it on the system. If I may, you cited that the bill would take nearly $40 million out of your city's budget. Would that be correct?
Yes, so first to your initial question, and thank you, Senator. I sent in the testimony this morning. I wouldn't imagine that the clerk had received it by the time of the hearing. So, but that has been sent in, and I'm happy to follow up with any additional information. That number was based off of in non-educational aid. Roughly, in the way that the bill is designed, it would be, I believe it's a little bit over 30% would go to these boards that would be appointed by in each neighborhood by the chief executive, and then another third would have to be agreed upon between the chief elected official and these boards. It doesn't go into great depth as to how that would work, but it would effectively make it so that we wouldn't the $40 million, which is those sort of 2/3 of what we receive in non-educational aid, that would be taken out of the way that we actually create a budget for the city, and then would be, as it's currently described, as I read it, would then be administered by those boards. And it just would simply not be, when we're already effectively not able to pay for very basic things in the city budget, it would simply not be feasible for us to do that.
As I understand the concept, and I just want to use the 40 million as a basis, okay? You say a third. So what you're literally saying is perhaps a third of that money is going to the nonprofits in your community, and you have some tremendous nonprofits in the community that provide such critical essential services in partnership with your city services, and that's very well documented. Would you agree with that our nonprofits in your community do a tremendous job of providing critical social services for those in the safety net?
Oh, absolutely. There's a tremendous nonprofit landscape within the city.
And my question would be, this would allow us to get the money to those organizations and provide the critical services, because I think we may all agree that the reimbursements and the support of our nonprofits has been woeful, not only in this past year, but for the past 10, 15 years. That being said, what is your budgetary allocation? Just give me an estimate that you give to these nonprofits. If you're just citing 1/3, and so what we're saying is literally you commit like 12, 14 million to the nonprofits, whereas the other remaining 2/3 gets decided by the municipal government to go to where is necessary. Would that be how you phrased it? That's why I don't have the testimony in front of me.
No. And I apologize if I was unclear. I'm not entirely, so the way that the legislation is written, to my understanding, is that for particularly, it cites the municipal revenue sharing grant, that if, which is obviously, as you know, not funded to its full extent, if that money is coming to the city, then we would divert 1/3 directly to oversight for, as it states, not nonprofits, but basically boards, neighborhood committee boards. And then the other third would be agreed upon between those committee boards and the city government. So it would be 2/3 of that non-education dollars that we were receiving, because it cites both municipal revenue sharing and select pilot account. And so for going to nonprofits, I don't know the current allocation that's going to nonprofits directly from the city, but it is nowhere near that amount of money from either pilot or MRSA.
And so just based upon your presentation, for me, you're literally saying at most 2/3 of that allocation is going to these boards, so community boards and nonprofits. So what happens to the other remaining 1/3?
So what I'm saying is, under this legislation, that's what it would do. Currently, those dollars are going to fund the essential services of city government, police, fire, our allocation to schools, social services. And so that's money that we are currently using right now. And so I use the $40 million number is roughly the equivalent of our entire police department. So that's what, if you're looking for a sort of 1-to-1 ratio of what that money is going to now, you could say that money is funding the entire New Haven Police Department, because it's not directly going there, obviously, but that's the equivalent amount of money that would be taken out of the budget that we put forward every year. Our budget, we're actually putting it forward next week. And so it would be essentially impossible. And also, New Haven currently is facing a $66 million budget deficit as the result of rising debt service payments and pension costs, because programs like Pilot and others have been so severely underfunded over time, and the inability of a low-income city with nearly 60% of its property being non-taxable to fund things. And so the state aid that we receive is essential to providing the basic services. And by basic services, we don't have a librarian in every school, we don't have a social worker or a counselor in every school. So we're providing the bare minimum of services to our residents as of now. And this would take more money out of that and then give it to entities that are not elected by the residents to serve them.
No, I appreciate that. And it seems to me it's just this bill presents a different approach, a different look to say, get to the money to where the services are critically directed. Now, do we know exactly the non-educational aid statutorily? Is there any specific requirement or purpose that it is directed, or is it just a broad-based interpretation by each municipality?
So for Pilot would be the primary example where it is not dedicated to any particular item. There's obviously education dollars through ECS, and then there are other state aids and state grants that we could get into the details of that likely come to the city with a specific specification to them. But the incited in this legislation, it was those broad-based MRSA and Pilot, which allow the city to cover operating expenses. And those services, to be clear, are not provided by nonprofits. There's a great nonprofit landscape, but something that is often sort of strange about our state without county government or any real equivalent is that cities provide significant regional services. Only about 20% of the people that our health department, for example, has vaccinated so far in the pandemic actually live in New Haven. Our housing authority, a third of our housing authority population is not from New Haven. There's a huge range of services that exist in New Haven that are provided through taxpayer dollars and funded both through our own property taxes and through aid from the state. That are operating expenses that we provide to our residents and ultimately the surrounding region.
Kevin, you raise very, very good points, and I appreciate the articulation as an advocate for the city of New Haven, which we have great fondness and respect for. And that's interesting because as well as intention this bill is, right? It looks at our nonprofits, it looks at our community board of influences to be able to allocate money directly to it. It is literally the state saying, look, we're going to tell you where you're going to put that money, right? And what you as a municipal leader are saying to the state is, look, this money is needed for us to collaborate and work on the critical services that we provide, but you're infringing on my home rule. You're infringing on my local control to be able to see what we know best locally. Would that be a fair statement to kind of, you cited that in articulate ways, but maybe I'm a simple person to say, there is a balancing act between, the money that we give as part of the taxpayers in our state, but the municipalities know best on how to allocate it. Even though this is a very noble and well-intended bill, it is kind of overstepping that your municipality and your governance through your Board of Finance and your leaderships know best to how to disperse that money to the critical needs within your community. Would that be a fair statement?
So I would actually say that it is not, and here's why. I think this bill follows a similar trend to a lot of the discussion that is going to come up over this session around the idea that local government is always the best entity by which to administer government. And there's a really legitimate idea that the governance that is closest to the people can be most reactive to the people's needs, and that's absolutely true. But the idea of hyper-locality, where we have 169 different little sort of fiefdoms that don't have any regionalization of services, is the reason that New Haven is so severely strapped. We're providing the services to the whole region, and yet the whole region is not supplying the tax revenue or the support that the municipalities, particularly our cities, need. And with, say, one great example that will come before this committee is regarding housing. The zoning codes of one municipality being entirely under this guise of sort of home rule, is having an impact on other communities in the state. So in New Haven, our residents are paying significantly, dramatically inflated prices for housing because of the lack of market rate housing stock that our state has. And so it's in the sort of home rule narrative, local governments are using that sort of concept to use government to impact the housing market. And that housing market is then having a severe adverse effect on the residents of New Haven. And so what my point here being the idea that hyper local government is the best way forward is not the answer here. This bill represents further strapping municipalities in need because we are so hyper localized that those services are not regionally created. And it's also, we have a system in the state where we're, as the mayor said yesterday, we're biting off or cutting off our nose to spite our face, where it is not normal that states have no county government. It is not normal that services are not regionalized. It's costing taxpayers significantly more in property tax revenue because it's such an inefficient system. And so what we're saying here is the idea that the smaller and smaller you get, the better government gets is not true. Some things are good because you can have a community that's reactive to them and change things that are not serving their needs. But when it becomes so local that you are not serving the needs of the whole community and only the interests of smaller, very small subsets of that community, it's detrimental to actually delivering the adequate services that communities need.
No, I appreciate your explanation, and I appreciate your astuteness in understanding the complexity of the big picture. But that being said, I think we may agree to disagree. From a standpoint of hyper-local governance, look, hyper-local governance is neighborhood groups. We're talking about municipalities, and just as CCM and various other entities could say, this is taking away from our ability to govern. That is a fundamental basis, and that should be a premise, which you articulated earlier. As much as you want to differentiate, in my opinion, I look at the Alliance as one of the organizations that represent the nonprofits that do tremendous work, and they do work at a cost efficiency to some of our state services that provide the same dual delivery services. We don't have that ability to differentiate. And this is a bill's intention, noble as it is, to say, let's put the money where it has the most impact and take it out of sometimes the bureaucracy. And so, of course, your organization, your municipal entity disagrees with that because you believe that government on a local basis has the best way to govern, whether it's hyper-local or based upon the size of your municipality. You need to understand there are other municipalities that said, look, we're not New Haven, we're not Hartford, we're not Bridgeport, and we have our unique aspect. And I still remember nearly 8 years ago, I had a conversation with then Speaker, Majority Leader, soon-to-be Speaker, Brendan Sharkey, who was the former chair of P&D. And when we go into a regionalized government, I remember one of the fundamental bases that he said to me that always stuck with me is, when you eventually go to a fundamental county government or shared services, when you have to make a decision on who makes the final decision, are you basing that decision on the money contributed, the impact to that community, or are you looking at population size? And I still remember the words that Brendan Sharkey, Representative Sharkey, said to me. Ultimately, it will be the population of the shared municipalities that will make the decision. That stuck with me because we're not county government. The state has tried this before, and that in their unique municipalities, that local control and home rule has some basis. If we go to the regionalized basis that you talk about, the bottom line is that stuck with me nearly 8 years ago is eventually it will be the biggest population municipalities that will dictate and control what happens next. And that is not what Connecticut is about to me. And I still remember that to this day as a foundational basis in saying we need to protect the delicate balance between home rule, local control, with the best of intentions that we have on state government. This is an example that may be a little bit different, looking at supporting our nonprofits and community boards. And I applaud the advocates of this bill in articulating that. in showing that we do deeply care and recognize the important services they provide, but it may run counter to the municipal government's desire to allocate proper resources and funds as they see it. So we may agree to disagree on that basis, but home rule is not one where we can pick and choose. It is a fundamental basis to allow our municipal government to have input in the people that they represent. So I thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking much more down the line. And I am eager to read your testimony. So thank you, Madam Chair, for this input.
And Madam Chair, could I just respond very quickly to that? And
Mr. Alvarez, just one moment. Okay, I'm willing to recognize you again, but yes, I will just remind everyone, if you can wait to be recognized, in that way we can be sure that the speaker view on the video is going to you. Mr. Alvarez, I will allow you a brief comment, please, and then Representative Winkler.
Absolutely, and I'll keep this very brief. Just the idea that the areas where more people live will carry more political power is essential to democracy. The idea that we need to ensure that less people have more political power than others is not a good idea in my mind. And the context of this is we're a state where most states in the country, about 47% of local costs, like schools, police, fire, are paid through local taxes. In Connecticut, it is 87% of that funding. And so poor communities have the entire inability to actually fund their services without state support or regional support, which is how other places do it. And whether you want to talk about it in terms of counties or in the state, we need to make sure that municipalities where there are the most underserved people have the basic resources to fund their basic government. And so it's not really about home rule, it's about we have communities in the state that are suffering, that do not have governments that can fund basic services now. And so we need to, before we talk about dividing up the money that goes to those cities and those communities, we need to talk about actually funding them adequately now, which is something that this would be a better use of the energies of this legislature to actually support the residents. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Representative Winkler, to be followed by Rep. Arnone.
Yes, thank you. The 30-member board of alderpersons you mentioned, is that elected by district, discrete districts, or at large?
They're elected by individual districts. There are 30 wards throughout the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Representative Arnone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this bill, as a former town councilor, makes my head throb. Pilot money is payment in lieu of taxes. So you're saying that the state reimburses us for properties that they may own in a town. We have a college, we provide fire protection, we provide road service in front of that, we provide police, we have prisons in my town in Enfield. So this is where Enfield and New Haven have a lot in common right now. So again, we provide fire, we provide police, we provide snow plowing and road service. So if you were to split this pilot money off and give it to what should be funded separately by the state of Connecticut, if you want to fund your nonprofits, then I think we should have another bill that funds nonprofits. But by taking pilot money away from towns is an instant tax increase, an instant mill increase in every municipality that I can think of, because they rely on that pilot money. And if you could just speak more even to pilot money and other earmarked money, which any grant that comes from the state is surely not just given to the town and we're going, woohoo, let's party. Every single dime of this money that go to these towns is for services, unless speak about a block grant. Those are what things we need to do more of.
Yes.
Elaborate on this, the reason why we get this money from the state.
Mr. Alvarez.
Yes, so for pilot, particularly for, and I know Enfield has the very similar challenges to us, pilot for New Haven, about 60% of our property is non-taxable. So when so much of our basic government is funded from property taxes, the police, fire, schools being the sort of basic things, but also social services, clearing roads, taking care of snowstorms, those are funded through pilot dollars. because they're essentially reimbursing us for the revenue that we are losing out on because our properties are non-taxable. And because pilot is not nearly fully funded, we're getting, typically New Haven has gotten between 35 and 38% of our statutory pilot reimbursement. We're now below 25% of college and hospital pilot reimbursement, which makes it genuinely impossible to provide the city services that residents deserve. And this is particularly important because right now we have rising debt service payments and pension costs. If we were receiving the statutory amount of pilot for the last decade, if all cities were receiving that, and this also extends to small towns. There are many small towns, particularly in Eastern Connecticut, that struggle with this. If that reimbursement was happening for all of these years, we wouldn't have cities in the financial situation that we're in now. It's not that, and I know this is sort of a common theme around cities, that cities just are spending money and their union contracts and this, that, and the other thing. But the reality is a police officer in New Haven is hired, I think in New Canaan, it's a starting salary is $70,000 a year. In New Haven, it's less than 50. The pension costs for New Haven per employee and per resident is so much lower than some of our wealthier suburbs. And that's totally fine by our suburbs that have the financial ability to raise those funds. It's not an us versus them in this regard. It is simply that we have a system that disadvantages communities, a lot of communities, and it's not just cities, in funding basic services. And this bill, in taking more of that money to divide it up amongst community groups that aren't elected, when we have a board that the people elect and New Haven is sort of notorious for enormous civic engagement. People know who their alder is. They know what they're signing up for when they cast their ballot. The people should be able to fund the basic services of government without the pilot one being underfunded as a whole, but also having it be divided up so that the government can actually function to serve the needs of its residents.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Alvarez, I appreciate your testimony today. Also, did not realize that there was a 30-member Board of Alders. That's a sizable body as a legislative body. What's the population of New Haven?
It's about 130,000 residents.
Okay. Here in Fairfield, when I served as a member of the RTM with just around, we were a little bit less when I was on the RTM, 60,000 residents. We had a 50-member RTM, and now it's a 40-member, but again, elected in districts, much as you are within your community. And so many of our communities have representative town meetings, that unique form of New England government. And certainly we even have town meetings themselves when people have the opportunity to have agency and voice and very much have input into the process of how those dollars are spent and allocated. So I appreciate you outlining that for us and explaining how things work in New Haven and the impact of what this bill would be on your community. Are there any further questions or comments from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being with us today, Mr. Alvarez.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Clerk, I believe that the next person available to testify is Mr. Barron. Is that correct? Or have either?
No, Mr. Barron is still the next one.
Okay, and Mr. Barron, I don't see you yet. If you're able to turn on your camera and your microphone and join us. Oh, wonderful. Yes, there you are. It's very nice to see you, Mr. Barron. Welcome, and please proceed, sir.
Nice to see you as well. I'm testifying on behalf of SB 838. I'm a resident of Fairfield, and I'm providing this testimony to voice my strong support for SB 868. I believe this legislation is critically important, not only to protect the right of community residences to be treated no differently than a single-family residence, i.e. group homes should receive protections, excuse me a minute, but also to protect our residential neighborhoods from commercial ventures that attempt to establish medical treatment facilities under the guise of community residences. There is simply no public policy reason or legislative basis to allow wealthy corporations, hedge funds, and private equity investors to own and operate medical treatment facilities in Connecticut residential neighborhoods that cater to affluent families, not only from Connecticut, but from throughout the United States. These facilities charge patients in excess of $1,000 per day for treatment, while ignoring the needs of the less affluent, including those on Medicaid, while destroying our residential neighborhoods that our zoning laws are intended to protect. As I noted, it is important to protect and preserve community residences, also known as group homes, to ensure that those with intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities and those with mental health and addiction disorders are able to reside in community residences for the long term. It is equally important to keep in mind that community residences are intended to provide for the long-term housing needs of the residents. They are not intended to be used for the short-term housing of patients receiving treatment. Connecticut appears to be seen by large for-profit entities as a fertile ground for establishing mental health and drug treatment facilities to house its patients for the customary 30 to 120-day treatment regimen. They have recognized that Connecticut has an affluent population that can afford the $1,000 or more fee for daily treatment, and they have tried to exploit loopholes in our statutory framework to operate in residential neighborhoods and with little or no regulatory oversight. SB 868 closes those loopholes by expressly providing that a community residence does not include a facility, one, that is operated by a for-profit entity to provide medical treatment to its residents on a short-term basis.
Hello?
Can you still hear me?
Yes, please proceed, Mr. Barron.
Or two, that does not receive funding from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and is required to receive a certificate of need from the state. While this legislation would not prohibit such entities from operating treatment facilities in Connecticut, they would be forced to abide by local zoning laws, as they would not have the same exemption from local zoning laws that community residences have. It is also important to recognize DEMA's oversight function. By requiring that a community resident receive DEMA's funding, a community resident is then subject to oversight by DEMA's, including assurances that services are being provided in a safe and sound manner, thereby protecting residents from unsavory operators. No such oversight applies to medical treatment facilities. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barron, and forgive the technical glitches, which we sometimes have. I think someone was unmuted. That's what happened. So
No problem.
it's great to have you here. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You cite the question of DEMAS oversight, and I want to correct that DEMAS is DMHAS, which is the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. But tell me about why that oversight is important.
Well, right now, these facilities are operating with really no oversight. Nobody really knows what's going on. There's little licensure, little oversight, little responsibility. So, and there's real questions, as you heard from Dr. Siegel, as to whether they're actually effective in their treatments. So this would bring a level of oversight that just doesn't exist now, to make sure that those people who are paying $1,000 a day are actually being treated well and getting better.
So it's not just the point of DEMAS funding that's critical, but also the oversight to ensure that the purported mission is following established and recognized protocols for support of mental health services and addiction services. Would that be correct?
Right. Along with the funding comes the oversight. Yes.
So you talked about the loophole, and this would close that. But I think your legal background was one that was extremely helpful in articulating why some of these loopholes might have existed. Just in your opinion, based upon our state and federal protection of exempted classes, of community and group homes, how do you think that these kind of loopholes have occurred, and why the mind and rationale for you as an attorney in understanding that the legislation, and I did cite the McKinney Foundation versus the town of Fairfield, which is often cited in the state of Connecticut. But can you talk about the loophole utilization against the intent of that kind of a legal opinion, which has
Sure.
really dominated throughout our state, right? In our local
Right now,
Connecticut-
there's no definition in Connecticut law of what a group home is. It's undefined. So it's if it barks like a dog and and talks like a bird, then you've got something going. But right now, there's no actual definition. So this intends to add that definition. As Representative Devlin said, the idea of a group home is you go to school, you come back home. You go shopping, you come back home. You go to your job, you come back home. So we sort of know what it is, but it's never actually been defined. So this would add some meat to just what we on a common sense basis know what a group home is, but it's not defined in the law. And in as much as it's not defined, these operators are coming in around the fringe and trying to pretend they're group homes, but they're not. These people are there. The people are there from 30 to 120 days, paying $1,000 a day. And every day there's treatment being provided. There's various therapists coming in and the like. It's a treatment facility. It's not a home. So the idea, so we can say that, but what does that really mean? And now, by virtue of this bill, we have a better understanding of exactly what a group home is.
This legislation wouldn't prohibit any entities from operating treatment facilities in Connecticut, correct? They would just have to be forced to by local zoning laws and residential zoning laws, just as they would have no exemption using Section 8-3E has a community group residents that are protected as an exempted class, which is critical. And I want to hear you articulate your support of that mission and support of that protected group as being able to have residential homes and being part of a community. And your support is in no way counter to that mission. I'd love for you to be able to articulate that and put that into record. But also, this would not prohibit any such entity that do not qualify from that to be able to operate in the state of Connecticut and provide the necessary critical services. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. There's nothing in this bill and nothing in what we've spoken about that would prohibit these entities from operating medical treatment facilities. The only thing we're dealing with really is the zoning, where they could do this. And as Representative Devlin said, it's like having an ice cream shop or a gas station. So it's unfair to the residents of the state to buy in a residential neighborhood and have somebody open a gas station next door. It's not zoned for that. Similarly here, the idea is that everybody has to abide by zoning laws, except if there's an exception. And by law, group homes have an exception. And we're actually protecting that. As you heard, a neighbor of ours who has a child with special needs wants to turn their house into a group home. If these make-believe entities come in as group homes, it limits the number of legitimate group homes there can be. Right now, there's a rule that you can't have more than, I think, 0.01% of your population in group homes, and they can't be more than, I think they have to be at least 1,500 feet apart. So by allowing these operators to pretend they're group homes, the real group homes are banned from operating where they should. So the commercial ventures should operate in commercial districts, and the true group homes can operate wherever they want, commercial or residential.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. I appreciate your insight, and I do want to, as people support of 868 come forth, I'm going to repeat my questions and get a validation from all of you that you are fully supportive of mental health, substance abuse, and protected communities and residents and individuals to be able to reside in group home and be part of an integral community. You're just looking to clarify that definition for better utilization and better protection of those intended groups. Would that be fair to say?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Barron.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Thank you, Mr. Barron. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Next on our list is, again, seeing if either of the previous folks on the list are not available. Next on our list, we have Timothy Eli. Mr. Clerk, is Mr. Eli available?
Yep, I'm bringing him in right now. Mr. Eli, can you hear us?
Mr. Eli, if you are able to join us by turning on your camera and unmuting yourself, we welcome you.
I think he might be calling in. Because I only see the microphone option, but he hasn't
And Mr. Clerk, if you could clarify if to unmute if someone is calling in, is it *6? Am I correct in that?
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Eli, if you're able to hear me and able to choose *6 so that we can hear your testimony. Okay, I believe we're having some technical issues. Mr. Clerk, if you can work with Mr. Eli to try and resolve those.
Yep.
We will go next if is Donna Hamzi Karocha from CCM with us as well?
Yep. She's in.
I am not quite seeing her yet.
Hey, I'm here. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Welcome,
Okay.
and please proceed.
Thank you so much. And it's really great to be before all of you today, as this is the first time I'm testifying before you this year. So I'm very excited, and thank you for managing all of this testimony in this new and really odd format, as I would love and prefer to be before you in person. So thank you, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, Senator Cassano, Senator Wong, and Representative Zullo for the opportunity to speak before you today on House Bill 6418. This bill is very near and dear to my heart, as Representative McCarthy-Vahey said back in 2019. Myself and really the pilot, Laura Settlemyer, I really co-piloted with her to get this bill passed. And at the time, you know, the thought was that this would be open to all municipalities, but for whatever reason, one reason or the other, the bill was passed with a threshold of population. So it only allowed for municipalities of 35,000 population or more to participate in this receivership program. So, you know, when this was passed, we had a lot of great input and feedback from our municipalities. And the goal was in 2020 to come back and lift this threshold so that all municipalities could benefit from this really important program to combat abandoned property and blight in a creative way, and just really a tool in the toolbox for municipalities dealing with these properties. And so it was really the will of CCM and then other smaller communities to lift this threshold to allow for the opportunities to this very important tool for all municipalities across the state. So I want to thank very much Representative McCarthy-Vahey for her leadership on this and for bringing this bill forward so that we could talk about it this year and hopefully open this up for all communities to use and to benefit from. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And yes, you're right, as I had said earlier, and it's nice to be able to say to you here, thank you for your leadership and championing this along with Ms. Settlemyer and the city of Hartford, who really supported the work. So with that, Senator Wong.
Thank you. I'll just echo the great work by you, Donna, and your colleague, and also the support of Chairman McCarthy-Vahey and Senator Cassano. It is a good idea, and removal of the threshold would allow abandoned, blighted property receivership programs to be available to not only one sector, but all of our communities in the state. So thank you very much for the insight. And it shows that we can do good things and make it all happen. So thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations for your work and initiative on this issue.
Thank you so much, Senator Wong. And I just have one question, seeing none from other members of the committee. My question is, we did hear testimony from one first select person or first selectman from a community, Mr. Chris, as you probably heard. Have you at CCM heard from other communities who have expressed interest in being able to participate and have this tool available?
So I don't have specific towns because there have been a lot, but a lot of them are, as he'd mentioned, or as someone had mentioned, I think, in the eastern Connecticut part of the state, and just smaller communities where there is blight, and the blight and abandoned properties, aren't dictated by population thresholds. They're really just everywhere. And so we did get the majority of folks that gave us feedback were those small towns who were questioning why they weren't involved or a part of this bill. So to answer your question, and less specifically than I'm sure you're looking for, it was really a small town ask. And I will say that I did speak to Torrington specifically, and she, Eleanor, the mayor there, Eleanor Carbone, did mention that they are actually able to take advantage of this, even though their population is below that threshold, because at the time, I guess they're using the most recent census, or the census that was most recent at the time, to actually take advantage of this. So they found a way to make this happen for them. And so clearly there is a need and a real want by communities that may not necessarily meet that threshold as defined by the Public Act.
And thank you for raising that point in terms of census numbers will be shifting this year. And so that could impact other communities. And by making this change, we have an opportunity to just clarify that and make it available for everyone. Well, thank you very much for your ongoing work on behalf of the municipalities of the state of Connecticut, and for your time with us. It's nice to see you back here before the committee. I'm sure we'll be seeing
Tim, how are
more
you?
of you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, can you let me know where we are in terms of folks on the list?
No, it's no problem. Thank you so much for letting me know.
I believe, Mr. Clerk, I think you were unmuted and now you are muted. Are you able to, is Mr. Eli able to join us?
He literally just called me. He's actually not testifying. He thought you had to register just to hear the meeting.
Understood. Okay. Well, and I know it's a different world right now. Folks are certainly able to submit written testimony without testifying in person. So just let me check in, and
I think Rick Hart would be next.
so, yep, next on our list would be Mr. Hart.
Oh, that's weird. He's not here. He was here. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Tom McManus is here though. He would be the next one.
So Mr. Powers is not yet available. And again, Mr. Clerk, as folks who we have missed become available, please do let me know, and we will have them jump in as they are available. So next on our list is Tom McManus. Mr. McManus, welcome. If you can turn on your camera and unmute yourself. There you are. It's wonderful to see you.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak, and thank you all for your public service. Okay, so let me dive into this. My name is Tom McManus, and I strongly support SB 868. The sad and unfortunate fact is that certain for-profit corporations exclude services to patients relying on Medicaid and only serve wealthy individuals or those with the best paying insurance coverage. In doing so, a divide is created within Connecticut Health Services. Two groups exist, where a highly funded and highly profitable group operates completely independently from an underfunded group. This cannot be. All individuals should receive equal resources for treatment regardless of financial condition. As the law currently stands, medical facilities enjoy the full protections of 8-3E and are free to extract returns to private equity investors and investment companies without regard to sustainability of our state's mental health care system. Any for-profit corporation seeking to gain the protections and special accommodations afforded within 8-3E should not only be fully financially accessible to all Connecticut residents, but should contribute to the healthcare funding resources available for mental health and addiction treatment outside of their own pocket. Now, specific to vetting and oversight, the state of Connecticut has a certificate of need vetting process that regulates certain types of healthcare providers and medical facilities. Through this process, OHS approves which types of treatments are allowed, which regulations and oversight apply, and a host of other requirements are determined. A group home is not subject to this certificate of need process as it is a home and a protected entity. OHS makes its determination of whether or not it's a group home or requires a con. Separately, 8-3E is currently written to protect persons receiving mental health or addiction services, but falls short to consider that some operators will be subject to the con process and OHS review and fail to achieve a group home designation. So currently, a medical facility operator is free to represent that they are protected by 8-3E in all planning and zoning cases, even when OHS has not designated them to be a group home, and even ones where regulation and oversight requirements are pending by OHS. Abusive 8-3E protections have extended into zoning, environmental protections, health department safety regulations, and has been invoked to establish regulations and oversight as inapplicable. 8-3E needs to be amended to be consistent with and respectful of the OHS con process. In conclusion, I urge you to vote in support of SB 868 to ensure accessibility and support the standard of care for all Connecticut residents seeking mental health and/or addiction treatment. To vote otherwise would be to allow the removal of health service funding from the state of Connecticut when it is needed most, and to leave the standard of care unchecked and inconsistent for patients suffering from mental health illness and addiction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McManus, and I appreciate your clarity and brevity. It's always welcome. Senator Wong.
Thank you. I will try to do my best on that point as well, Madam Chair. Mr. McManus, how does this extract revenue from our current healthcare system?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. So let's simplify the picture into two homes. So the entire health services for mental health and addiction services, we simplify it into two homes. One home accepts Medicaid, the other one does not. Now, the one that does not attracts the out-of-pocket payers and the patients that have high-paying insurance providers. They exclude any Medicaid patients, whereas the only service that's offered to Medicaid patients is the other home. So if the first home that receives all of the cash profits that are not paid for by the state, they get the full benefit and they transfer that money out to their shareholders. Now, the second home that is not getting the benefit, that is losing all of those patients that are paying out of pocket or the higher paying insurance companies, those houses, that second house is left relying in a greater sense the funding from the government. Okay, so our entire healthcare system is now focused on supporting more so that second home, whereas the first home walks away with profits. I hope that was clear.
Thank you. Just clarifying the definition, what you're saying by that kind of a financial model is to really ensure accessibility, right? And support the standard of care for all Connecticut residents. And no way in your support of this are you looking to remove services from a variety of entities, for-profit or nonprofit, transitional. Nowhere are you looking to prohibit them to locate in the town, but in this definition to ensure that the protected class under section 8-3E is protected and protect the ratio and what was cited example that a resident home, should they want to be built near this type of a facility, under this kind of definition that we're trying to define,
Yeah.
would be prohibited, right?
Absolutely. There's 2 points I'd like to make to that. One is the importance of treatment. Absolutely. I firmly believe, I think we can all agree here that we're going to have an increased need for services, and those services need to be available to all of our Connecticut residents. But they have to be done in a way that is supportive of our healthcare system here. If we reward, okay, these private investment companies to strip mine our neighbors, our state funding for these important services at their profit, then we're building an unsustainable system here in Connecticut. So, I absolutely support group homes. I absolutely support medical facilities. I absolutely support grassroots and community organizations such as Fairfield Cares. These are great things, and we need to expand on all of these things. However, we cannot reward private investors to take the funds away from Connecticut here. I think it's pretty straightforward. We need to get this right. Now is the right time to do it. We're going to have an increased need for services in the future. We need to set fair guidelines in a way that supports our entire state's healthcare system.
Thank you. And I just want to be redundant and just simply state that in no way are you looking to limit them into facilities, into various towns and residences. You're just making sure that they comply with a consistent standard of any for-profit or any business entity or medical transitional facilities. So thank you, Mr. McManus. I appreciate your time, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'm working on my way in brevity.
Thank you. As I say often, not just to you, but to everyone, that is always appreciated, we know, but also just the clarity. I think, Mr. McManus, I just have one follow-up question for you. And you and I have spoken before, along with a number of other folks in the community. And there are a lot of pieces and layers to this issue. While this bill is specific to the zoning piece and the definition of group home, I think something that you said is really interesting and important to me. And you referenced Fairfield Cares, and of my work as a social worker and work in prevention, certainly. And I think we all agree on that, as we're hearing today. Mr. Barron in his testimony talked about the medical facilities really being in the right place in the community is what he was referring to. And I think, something that you said is the idea of the funding mechanisms. And if you have a private company, what impact that may or may not have on the other systems. And I would say, as things stand now, private companies or not, we definitely have a disparity in terms of people's ability to access services. We don't have enough services available for the number of people, unfortunately, right, that we're seeing increasing. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you is, thinking about just the zoning piece of it, is it your position that a private medical facility, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, as long as they were within a zone that was properly zoned, that would be acceptable? Or are you also saying that there's a concern, even if they are in a zoned area, about that funding model and funding mechanism?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because there are multiple layers to this. So firstly, I do believe there needs to be a place for these medical facilities. And in fact, locally, in our town, leadership offered locations to this private equity firm to begin their business in appropriately zoned locations. All right, so we want to work with these private companies. However, we need to set very clear guidelines in how they can operate. These investment companies are driven absolutely by the dollar. And you could question, maybe they do have, an altruistic purpose here to serve a patient, but without a doubt, their motivations for profit are strong. So as a state, we need to be very clear as to what's acceptable and what is not acceptable, not to exclude them, but to just be very clear. And I think that going back to the, how 8-3E is currently written and what the process, the de facto process is within OHS, we have inconsistencies within our own government. So OHS does a great job of vetting these entities to make sure that they're operating in a safe manner. But what unfortunately is happening from a zoning perspective is because 8-3E is general, which can be a helpful thing sometimes, but in this case, it's very destructive because we have these private equity investment companies saying, I'm protected under 8-3E. Well, you know what? You actually have responsibilities to the state of Connecticut. You have responsibilities to our patients within the state. And let's work together, but this is where we draw the line.
And I appreciate that clarification. And that's why I asked, is because what I'm hearing you say is that you believe we have to provide some guidance and guardrails, so to speak. I've been using that term a lot lately in terms of these private organizations, not that they would be excluded completely from the process, but to be sure that there were things in place to protect folks, given that it is a private for-profit company. And one thing that strikes me as we've had this conversation over time is that the need is tremendous and no one is disputing that. I don't hear anyone disputing that. But how we address the need, if we as government are not able to make the kind of investments in both prevention ends, which is where I tend towards, and to put my time into, I should say, but also on the recovery end, if a nonprofit is then not able to also meet that need, which is what we're seeing now, that's what we're seeing happening. And I think that this is a much broader conversation that goes well beyond the purview of this committee, and certainly touches on a number of other committees, since today we're here to talk specifically about that zoning piece of it. But I think it raises some really, really good and interesting conversations that need to continue going forward, since we know that the addiction crisis is not going away anytime soon. So I thank you for clarifying that and for your testimony here with us today. Are there other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being with us today, Mr. McManus.
Thank you very much.
Next on our list is Katie Montgomery, excuse me. Mr. Clerk, is Ms. Montgomery available and with us in the Zoom?
No, I think the next one would be, let me just check for Cynthia Kinney because she was here before. And if not, it would be.
Just for folks following along at home, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Clerk. We have on our list Katie Montgomery, then Justin Spencer, Cynthia Kinney, and Betsy Guerra. Mr. Clerk, back to you.
Betsy, all of those are still not here. So the next one would be Megan McCloat, who is here.
Okay, wonderful. Again, keep me up to date, Mr. Clerk. And if Ms. McCloat, oh, there she is. And it's wonderful to see you. Welcome, Ms. McCloat. Please proceed.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I'm still getting used to this new Zoom world, as I know you all are working so hard to make sure that we can do this. So thank you very much for the opportunity. As I've learned, as all of us have now been logged in since 10 a.m., I think the best way to do this is to completely scrap my entire written testimony and really just speak about the major issues that we're presented with what we're trying to clarify with Senate Bill 868. The reality is, as many of the people who came before me have spoken about, is there's a major need for a clarification in the law as it's written. It's a well-intentioned law. I imagine it was working very well up until recently, until clearly we have been identified as a state, as a place where the ambiguity can be abused. And we're beginning to see it happen. And before it continues to be a detriment to the impact of the mental health treatment access issues we have in the state, we've got to do something about it. There's just no other way to say it. So the major importance of this bill is that it's a mere clarification as the law exists now. It's not going to change the impact of the law. It's going to further keep it in the well-intentioned guardrails, as you put it, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, that make sure that it keeps people who are able to live in a community, long-term living, and distinguishes that from people that are transiently using residential zones because they're patients at a commercial operation. It's a big difference, and they're not the same thing. So what we're comparing, to make it very clear and concise, is a mental health residential living center, which is licensed by the Department of Public Health through DEMIS, and a community residence, which is, as we say in Connecticut, a group home, and it's licensed through the Department of Public Health, often through other entities that are not DEMIS. And the difference is that one of them is a residential area where people live long-term, as the original opener on this bill, Dr. Siegel talked about. It's a long-term fabric introduction into our community. And the mental health residential living center is intended to be for stays that are less than 90 days of a tenancy. They're paying very high prices as patients there in order to get treatment. Often it's adolescents and what we're seeing in Connecticut. So it's a lot of times their parents are private paying, or they're getting very minimal reimbursement from private insurers. But most importantly, by having the law as it includes DEMIS funding oversight, it's supposed to be the check and balance that it's being regulated by our body in our state that distributes the Medicaid funds. And that's twofold, right? Why do we think that's important? It's because the distribution of Medicaid funds, number one, makes sure it's reaching the people who need these services. It makes sure that it's getting access to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it because their insurance doesn't carry it or they have no insurance at all. But number two, it's also important because if you're a Medicaid funded program, you have to comply with the Medicaid guidelines. It means the guidelines of quality, it means the guidelines of affordability. And most importantly, in the healthcare economic structure, which I know we've touched on a lot up into this testimony, I want to really reiterate it, is that if we continue to allow people to charge exorbitant fees because they are not bound by the Medicaid guidelines of what the ceiling of the cost of reimbursement is, we are going to completely deplete the marketplace economy. The system is going to fail. And I say that dramatically because it's true. We only have a handful of qualified providers in the state. We all hear about it on the news. We have a terrible, terrible physician and provider shortage. If all of those are going to be drawn to a private, high cost paying system, as the state allows it with this, ambiguity in 8.3e, there's not going to be enough providers left to provide the Medicaid reimbursement services to the people that have zero access to insurance. So what does that do down the line? It means that the cost of everything in the state is going to skyrocket because the state of Connecticut's not going to be able to get their hands on a provider that can actually provide services because we're not going to be able to afford them. They're all going to be working for these really, really wealthy and high reimbursement private cost places. So if we don't nip this in the bud as it is now, we're setting ourselves up to fail in a much greater context than zoning. We're setting ourselves up to fail as an entire healthcare economy in the state. And I know nothing is ever more present on any of our minds in the middle of a global pandemic is the cost of healthcare. So if we can look at the fact that people are already abusing the zoning law, we have to stop and say to ourselves, well, wait a minute, what is missing out of the regulation of 8.3e as it's written? And it's very clear because the state has already taken steps to create an Office of Health Strategy that makes this distinction. It's a very easy fix by requiring that the certificate of need is evidenced in order to get the type of restriction we need from zoning, because that really just delineates it for us. It makes sure that we're keeping the people that need this protection in zoning where they should be. And it makes sure that nobody else is trying to get in there for the sole purpose of profiting and not delivering the same type of access to the care of the people that need it. So I hate to completely go off my script, but I really want to just make sure that the clarification is very clear to everybody who's been with us in the last almost 3 hours, because I know it's a very multi-layered issue, but it really isn't as complex as it may seem. It's really a difference. We're comparing apples to oranges, and it's really time that we clarify that they're not the same thing. A community residence, which is a group home in Connecticut, is not the same thing as a mental health residential living center. And the Office of Health Strategy has already declared that. So that's basically how I wanted to just address my testimony. And I'm of course open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McClote, and for the time and attention that you have devoted to this and to your community. It is admirable. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Ms. McClote. Thank you so much. Can you help me clarify? Can you clarify why the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, DMHIS, and the federal Medicaid funding is so important to better define the protection that you talked about under 8-3E? Because that's important, because what we're seeing is, and you articulated, we're almost having a two-tier mental health, substance abuse delivery services to the significantly high-paying, Ken versus those that the general population. Can you articulate why that funding is so important?
Absolutely. So to break it down, really, the DMHIS, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, is the state distributor of Medicaid funds. So without DMHIS, anybody who has Medicaid and needs services cannot get them because they have to be distributed through DMHIS. So that body is in charge and has tasked with being regulating of these entities to make sure that the facilities are charging the appropriate cost for reimbursement. They're not charging exorbitant fees. If something can cost $100, they have no business charging $1,000 for it, right? That just costs the state more money. So by making sure that there's a check and balance through DMHIS funding, which is literally the only Medicaid pathway for mental health and addiction services in the state, you are making sure that the services are going to the people that need it. You have to qualify for Medicaid, as we all know. Nobody can just say, hey, I want Medicaid, but you have to make sure that it's going to people that literally would have no other access to treatment but for the state reimbursement. So that's the important piece of the economics. The second part is, and it's a thing that's very important to me, is the quality of healthcare. If you are not a medicated regulated facility, which means in order to be a Medicaid regulated facility, you have to accept Medicaid as an insurance. You have to have the belief that everybody deserves access to treatment regardless of their ability to pay. So if you're a Medicaid regulated facility, you've got to comply with what Medicaid says. You can't just do what you want. You can't just say, I'm going to have, water polo and it's going to treat addiction recovery, because we don't have any evidence-based empirical evidence to prove that. So we need to stay within Medicaid guidelines to make sure that they're quality treatment deliveries. And we count on our federal government to dictate what that is. And our state, through DMHIS, counts on those regulations to make sure that people are getting the best quality of care. It also is a better regulator of access. And I say that because they have a concept of how many facilities they're giving money to. If they don't know they're giving you money, they don't have any reason to know you exist. You can exist out of your basement, call yourself whatever you want, and you could be doing whatever you want with practically zero regulation. I say practically because I want to be completely clear. They do still have to obtain a license to operate a mental health residential living center. But if they're not Medicaid regulated, they're not getting the same types of check-in regulations. Medicaid facilities get checked on sometimes every couple of months. If you don't have to accept any federal funding, you can go without a Department of Public Health intervention or investigation or walkthrough evaluation for 2 to 3 years. Just think about at the rate at which these facilities are seeing patients. If they're turning over a home full of 6 to 8 residents every 90 days, how many patients have gone through between one license check and another in 3 years, and they have been slipped through the crack because nobody was checking to see what these facilities were doing? It's a disaster. And I say that very, very dramatically because it is. I mean, as we know, and I do like to loop in, Representative McCarthy-Vahey's tremendous work with what she does with Fairfield Cares, we have a much bigger issue than any of us may realize about the increasing need of access to mental health and addiction recovery. We are in a crisis. This is not news. And the further we create an issue to happen by not making sure that who's operating the treatment facilities are operating within guidelines, we're in uncharted territory, and we really can't afford to see so many people going under without making sure we keep them in those guardrails.
Senator Wong, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful, and it was very educational. And that's why is the certificate of need the method that you suggested that should be added to kind of further clarify these type of facilities from a group home under 8-3E?
That's an excellent question. And I know we're throwing around a lot of terms, so I'm really trying to make it completely easy to understand, is that the reality is the certificate of need program is what the state has already done to distinguish this issue. The state, we're not trying to navigate, new waters here. The state has created the certificate of need process, which is administered through the Office of Health Strategy, to make sure that we are separating one type of an entity from another. And the certificate, it's very specifically delineated, and I think it's 19A490 of the Connecticut General Statutes, which facilities require a certificate of need because they are a healthcare entity, and which do not. You do not need a certificate of need if you are not performing any healthcare activity. It's literally the difference between I'm going to open an ice cream store, or I'm going to open a mental health recovery center, or I'm going to open a sober living home, or I'm going to open a group home for intellectually disabled individuals, or I'm going to open a shopping mall. The Office of Health Strategy has the certificate of need application that literally requires the applicant to check which boxes are going to require them to continue with the certificate of need program or not. I like to give a very quick example just because it really touches it home. If you have two people that go to the Office of Health Strategy and apply for certificate of need, and one is a mental health residential living center, and the other one is just trying to do a home where 6 unrelated people are going to live for many years because they have no access to sustainable housing, one of them is going to be told to continue the certificate of need process until they're approved, and the other one is going to say, you don't need a certificate of need. And that's important. It's the community residence and group home that is specifically exempted from the certificate of need process by 19A638B. It's already been delineated, but because 8-3E doesn't reference certificate of need at all, zoning officials have no idea what questions to ask. So all we're doing is clarifying, saying, make sure that the people that are trying to use the group home exemption don't require a certificate of need. Because if they did, they're trying to operate a healthcare facility. The Office of Health Strategy is telling them that.
Thank you. And Representative McCarthy-Vahey cited that, you would support these type of varying treatment facilities, even if they don't qualify under 8-3E in other parts of throughout our state and communities. But it is critical and important that mental health and substance abuse services are readily available by many different methods. It's just a zoning question. But can you cite an example that has occurred in your general community that is a model to emulate, that incorporates a mixed payer mix that is in collaboration and works in a transit and commercial related zone? Can you cite examples? Because I think Representative Arnone talked about what are some examples we can articulate and compare to of models that have worked. Could you share any such model that we can emulate?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to speak specific to Fairfield County because that's where I'm from, but everywhere from Greenwich up until at least as north I know as Westport, there are entities, and some of them, I will even argue, are for-profit entities. They're not nonprofit, but they accept Medicaid because they recognize the benefit and the importance of having a national standard of the type of work that they're doing. And they also understand that a lot of psychology and research has been put into the fact to determine that it's not necessarily the best model to provide treatment in a place where they live. If you think about it, none of us, have all of our doctor's appointments inside our own home, generally in a non-pandemic world without telemedicine, because it's not the best system to receive recovery treatment in a place that's also supposed to be your safe space in your home. I think that that's a really important understanding, that there's lots of very, very successful companies that do this a little bit differently. I know of 2 all the way from Greenwich up until Westport, where they do make sure that people have a sustainable place to live in a proper group home, and they transport those individuals to a facility where they receive their treatment. None of that would be precluded by what we're trying to clarify today, because there's nothing there that's violating a zoning regulation. They may have a traditional group home where individuals who are recovering from mental health and addiction disorders live, and they have a properly commercially zoned medical treatment facility. Or maybe it's a multi-use zone, but it's not a AA or AAA residential zone. It's separate, and that's because they are trying to stay within the guidelines of what our law allows. And that's the only thing we're trying to do, is to make sure that the access to these types of very, very, very much needed services are done within the laws that we've already created. And because it is not specifically clarified, it's being abused. And it really is threatening the quality of healthcare, the access to healthcare, and the cost of healthcare for many years to come if we don't do something about it.
So let me repeat, and so I understand that nowhere in this statute and defining or clarifying the definition of community group homes are you looking to prohibit any type of facilities to be placed in municipalities. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. I will go further to say that. My background is in behavioral health, and specifically in healthcare economics as well. My passion is public health. I cannot say strongly enough how much the need for services is in this state and in this country right now. The increasing rates of opioid addiction are terrifying. Anybody who researches it will agree. It is a drastic issue. Nothing about this legislation is going to decrease access. Nothing about this legislation is going to impair quality. It is merely a clarification of the law, and they are absolutely needed in our state. They're needed in my town of Fairfield. The reality is we need to make sure that they're operating through a regulated procedure, and by doing that and making them follow the zoning guidelines as they're written, by clarifying that they distinguish themselves either as a community residence group home or a healthcare facility as dictated by the Office of Health Strategy, that they're properly identifying who they are so that they can be regulated properly and that the quality of treatment is the highest we can possibly control.
Thank you. And that's an important distinction, because not only are you looking at DEMIS funding as an integral part of this definition for group homes, but you're also looking that any such facility should have some degree of health strategy and acceptable medical practice oversight. Entities that do not comply with that model, they're more than welcome to exist, but we're also running up a consideration or a concern that they need not and they do not have to subject themselves to acceptable medical standards and review that DEMIS regulates on behalf of the people of the state of Connecticut. Would that be a fair statement as well?
Absolutely. And I think that's, Senator Wang, I think that's a really important point you touch on, because some of you may be sitting back and saying, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't they just accept DEMIS funding? And I want to say this clear and unequivocally. There is literally no reason to not accept DEMIS funding other than the fact that you want to charge higher than the Medicaid reimbursement rate. There's literally no other negative that could come from receiving DEMIS money. If we all think about it, why would we not all want to receive federally granted money for our organization? It makes no sense. The only reason you would deny that funding is because you don't want to comply with any of the regulations or the cost ceilings. It's no different than a private insurer has to negotiate with physicians and providers to make sure that they're getting reimbursed within the Medicaid guaranteed reimbursement rate. As I used the example before, if something costs $100 for a Medicaid patient, where do we get off charging $1,000, $2,000 for the very same thing that a Medicaid patient would get reimbursed $100 for from the state? It makes no sense. So if they avoid any DEMIS regulation, they're allowing themselves to charge virtually, literally anything they want. And there is just no argument that that is good for mental health care delivery. I have yet to find an argument where somebody says the higher the cost of the treatment for the same thing that can be offered cheaper has a better result. I've literally seen no empirical evidence on it.
Well, thank you, Ms. McCloke, and thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to also echo the very good work of Fairfield Cares in our broader community, and that Madam Chairwoman's involvement in it is greatly appreciated. So thank you, Megan, and thank you for your time, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Zullo to be followed by Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two sets of questions. One is just a little bit more about intent, and then the second is a little bit more technical, because I want to make sure that as we push this forward that we get it right. So just first with regard to intent, there was some testimony earlier, I believe it was when Rep. Devlin was here, I don't know if you were here at the time, that I don't want to use the word, bamboozled, but almost to the extent that applicants before zoning, let's say, were being less than forthright. And now I've heard you say that zoning officers or zoning boards don't necessarily have the proper guidance. Is that what you're looking at this doing? Is that it's intended to give them the guidance to be able to distinguish when applicants come before them what they're looking at, essentially?
Absolutely. I think our specific issue in Fairfield, both of the examples you just cited happened simultaneously, which is an unfortunate constellation of events that I think many of us are still trying to figure out how it happened. But it is able, in any municipality that doesn't have a specific process for vetting a group home right now, it is possible that somebody could walk in and say, I would like to change the use of a single family home in this AA residential zone. I want to change it to a group home. And there may not be any process that allows the zoning officer to ask any questions about whether they are a legitimate group home, whether they have already started an application to receive any license to operate a group home, or whether or not they have already been told by the Office of Health Strategy that they don't require a certificate of need because they are a group home. And that last prong I mentioned is really the easiest way to fix this, because it's a very simple box that we're asking to be added, right? Is that we allow zoning officials to look at 8-3E and say, okay, are you 6 or under, people unrelated living together? Okay, that would check for a group home. Do you receive DEMIS funding? They would have to answer that, yes or no. And are you required to have a certificate of need? If the answer is yes to that question, they are not a group home because they've been told that they need a certificate of need by the Office of Health Strategy. They would have already gotten that decision to be able to answer that question, if that makes sense. So it is a matter of creating a process that allows all of our local municipalities to revert to a very clearly defined law that says, okay, let me just make sure that everybody who comes in here for a group home is going to fit within the law that they're entitled to be exempt from zoning regulation.
I appreciate that clarification, and I was understanding it correctly, and sometimes just hearing it again helps. Secondarily, I just want to drill down a little bit on the usage of the term private for-profit medical facility, because I want to make sure that we don't inadvertently create a loophole. Community residences, can a group home, a community residence be for-profit and not be a medical facility?
Can a community residence be for-profit and not be a medical facility? I believe the answer to that is yes, and that would not fall within this exemption because the regulation would require that these people receive DEMIS funding. I think I'm following your question. You're saying, can a traditional group home, let's say it's for somebody even who doesn't have mental health treatment, have intellectual disabilities, can they still be for-profit owned?
And I assume, yeah, that's the question. And I assume the answer is yes.
The answer is yes, although I don't believe it would ever be it wouldn't be a very financially lucrative model because everybody who has a disability is entitled to Social Security disability benefits, which is how they receive funding from the Department of Disability Services, right?
Okay.
So I don't know that it's an interesting question because I don't know that any corporation would try to open a for-profit group home for somebody with a defined disability that wouldn't want any access from DDS funds. But it's an interesting question and I do want to look into that further. I don't believe any exist in Connecticut.
I would just want to know because I wouldn't want, if they did exist or if someone wanted to, I would read this to actually potentially exclude them because they would be a private for-profit they're a group home, they're not a medical facility, but I don't know that medical facility is a statutorily defined term. It's a term being used here. So I would want to look into that just to make sure that the intent of this is to protect community residences, distinguish them from medical facilities. And I want to make sure we don't inadvertently end up hurting what may be a small class of organizations, but a class of organizations nonetheless. And
Yeah,
then
I think that's a really important question because healthcare facility is of course defined and it specifically says substance abuse treatment facility and addiction treatment facility. So we know fit in here, right?
Right.
If I'm not sure it would ever qualify, I don't know of any group home that would ever questionably dip into a medical facility that's to treat somebody with a disability as long as there's no healthcare activity happening there. Because the Office of Health Strategy would have designed that then to be a separate category like a mental health residential living center or even a sober living home, which is a separate entity or different types of licensing bodies that is all run by either DEMIS or DDS or DCF. Let's not forget there's a tremendous amount of DCF regulated entities that if they're treating people with certain diagnoses, they're licensed through that. I don't believe that it would ever be considered a community residence that would fall within this if there's no healthcare activity happening. So I think the way that it's worded intends to reach the exact same intention that it did exist as the original 8.3E. It's just further clarifying. It's all uniform, and that local municipalities can uniformly follow guidelines to make sure that no town is going to be treating any different organization differently than its neighboring town.
I appreciate that. And then my second question is, can you have a private not-for-profit medical facility? Because nonprofit status is just simply a matter of how you organize and how you conduct your business. So can you have a private nonprofit medical facility?
I believe you can have a private nonprofit medical facility. They would not be entitled to any DEMIS funding as a result of that classification. But I guess my question would be back to you in terms of how do you think that facility would operate and how would it come in violation of this verbiage as intended?
Well, I'm not thinking violation. I'm thinking we're dealing with a class of organizations that's arguably, or some people have said, been exploiting loopholes. What I'm trying to make sure of is that there aren't any loopholes in what we're passing now. And so what I'm trying to get at is if somebody has a private nonprofit medical facility, would they be able to apply? Would they be considered a group home? So I guess the answer would be no, right?
Right, because the way that it's worded, it's a private for-profit medical facility or a facility that receives no funding from DEMIS and is required to obtain a certificate of need.
And so what you're saying is that a private nonprofit medical facility would not receive DEMIS funding and would be required to obtain a certificate of need.
Correct. So they would never be considered a community residence.
Got it. Okay.
But I hope that makes sense. I know it's a lot of back and forth checking of boxes, but
no, it does make sense. And I think I needed to actually, it's very straightforward. And I think I just need to talk it out with somebody who understands it better than I do to make sure that I understood it. And I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Zullo. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. Not to get too deep in the weeds, but I want to examine a possible loophole. In a convalescent home, some people are private pay, some people are public pay. Is that even a possibility in a group home?
if they're private pay or group pay, they're already a group home. So that would not be included here in terms of an exemption, because the certificate of need covers that, because the Office of Health Strategy does not require a certificate of need for any residential care home, nursing home, or rest home, the ones that are defined in 19A490.
So I'm a private entrepreneur who sets up the state's poshest group home, and they're all private pay except one. I have one Medicaid or Husky or whatever person in there. specifically for the purposes of avoiding this problem, is that even possible?
It's possible, and it wouldn't be, I think the answer is it's possible, and it wouldn't even be an issue for this because there's no healthcare related work happening in the poshest of group home. Those people are actually living there. And I think that's the distinction, and not to harp on something that so many people have spoken about, but a group home is intended for somebody to live on a longer term basis. I'm not saying they have to live there for the rest of their life, right? You know, none of us live in any of our homes for the rest of our life, but most of us do plan when we call something home to live there for longer than 90 days. And that's what this bill is trying to clarify, that nothing is a transit commercial operation in a residential zone.
Okay.
Medical treatment being delivered.
Is there any other kind of funding from DEMIS other than the amount that they pay to the group home on behalf of the individual?
Is there any other funding from DEMIS other than the amount they pay for the group home? Sure. So there are services that they receive. If I am a patient recovering from addiction and I have been diagnosed with an addiction disorder, and I am, let's say, discharged from a hospital and I'm supposed to live in a congregate living situation, and I need to receive treatment. So I need to receive, whether it's psychotherapy in the morning, maybe I need to receive Suboxone, maybe I need, there's obviously a whole spectrum of treatment options. Those are going to be reimbursed through Medicaid, which is distributed through DEMIS. So that would be covered. All of my treatment coverage would be covered in the term DEMIS covered services.
And DEMIS would pay the group home if the group home provided those services?
Well, that's the thing. If they're not licensed to operate their facility as a healthcare situation, but somehow they're trying to obtain a license through the licensing board, Department of Public Health, as a community residence, well, then DEMIS has no reason to even know what they're doing. They're not going to send them a bill, right? So if it's somebody who's getting DEMIS funding, they're only getting that because they qualify for Medicaid. So that's the check and balance, right? That's how the state knows who they are. They know where they are, and they know what kind of treatment they're getting, and they know that it's quality treatment because the state's dictating what the reimbursement rate is on it. If somebody doesn't get DEMIS covered services, the state has no reason to know. It would actually be a HIPAA violation, right? The state would have no reason to know who's living where and what kind of services they're getting because it doesn't really ever come across their desk. That's the check and balance of the importance of DEMIS, making sure that people are not discriminated against by where they live by 8-3E, because we know that these are people that don't have access to funding for, private funding for living expenses or treatment expenses. So the negotiation that happens on what Medicaid covers in terms of their cost of living or their cost of treatment happens through DEMIS. If you don't have Medicaid, the state has no interaction with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Ms. McLeod, I have a couple questions. One thing you said is, why wouldn't you accept Medicaid funds in terms of the rates for reimbursement? And I think one thing that strikes me is when I think about fellow parents' ability to access psychiatry services, not in an inpatient setting, but just, or even just therapists, that we are struggling with the availability of those services. So we have a number of providers in our state who are not taking insurance, for example, right? And are certainly charging much, much higher rates. It's an issue of supply and demand. I certainly am not casting aspersions on those folks. In fact, I'm very grateful that we have the people out there providing those kinds of services to us right now. How, as you were talking about that in terms of this kind of setting, how would you make a distinction between those two? Because I think we face the same issue in terms of the supply and demand, and we both agree and have said that on just what kind of demand there is for services. But how would you address that, just given that analogy?
So how would I address the fact that more providers are not accepting insurance? Is that the question?
No, more, and you heard probably my conversation with Mr. McManus, that there are questions in terms of how we have for-profit providers, and particularly those funding mechanisms. But what I am suggesting is, as we see in outpatient treatment with psychiatry and psychology and social work services, for example, we have a number of providers who are certainly making a living and are not accepting insurance reimbursement or, Medicaid funds. And they are able to do that in part because there is such a strong and high demand for those services and the supply is limited. And that's what strikes me with this is, in a sense, we're in a similar situation. And I'm wondering if you would agree and if you see that similar to how I'm expressing it, or if you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I think it alludes a little bit to what I was saying about how it just perpetually promotes the lack of check and balances, especially glaring loopholes like are in 8-3E. If we continue to be a state that's identified as a place where people can open up a mental health residential living center and maybe even do it in a really, swanky neighborhood, they're going to be able to pay their providers more. And it's creating a disincentive for anybody to accept Medicaid if we continue to allow this to happen. So I think we're both saying the same things, completely coming from different perspectives. One being, the lack of access to care that you're arguing about, and my argument that we're actually setting that up to happen because we're not clarifying things like this. Obviously, this conversation expands long beyond the zoning regulation here because it's obviously an issue in our healthcare reimbursement model for the state too. But as long as things like 8-3E exist and corporations are aware of them, we're feeding into that problem. I agree entirely that the number of providers that are increasing their likelihood to not accept insurance, or worse, not accept Medicaid specifically, is a result of the fact that they're being driven out and they're feeling the pressures of reimbursement disparities, so much so that it's much easier to go get a job at a place that doesn't care whether or not you're checking in on your Medicaid certifications and everything. They're going to pay you more to not do it because they get to charge people a lot more. And the reality is, at some point, there is a ceiling that people cannot afford this type of treatment. And I think we all can look within our souls and realize we know somebody who's been touched by addiction, somebody who's still struggling for mental health treatment, and maybe even somebody who's needed a form of rehab or residential treatment. And we can ask ourselves, these models that are being allowed to exist in Connecticut, would our loved one be able to afford that? And if the answer is no, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, if any of the individuals you work with through Fairfield Cares is not able to afford this treatment, well, have we really done them any service? Have we really met that gap of access? Knowing that a loophole exists like this, that's only contributing to drive up the cost of healthcare and drive up the amount of providers that are refusing to accept Medicaid or insurance. Have we done anything other than further the problem?
I think there are a lot of layers to this. We have a very much bifurcated system, and there are a large number of people in the middle who do not have access currently to services, and we have to address that. And I think one of the things you would probably agree is that we have to invest significantly more in those treatment services for people. I think, specific to some of the organizations that have been discussed today, I will say that I have heard, I'm not exactly familiar with what is or isn't accepted, but I think the point you're making is well taken. The one other question that I wanted to ask you specifically was related to the fact that this bill was previously heard in the Housing Committee. We did not hear it in Planning and Development, and I think you're familiar with the reasons why. When we first brought the bill up and spoke with, as we do, our nonpartisan attorneys in the Legislative Commissioner's Office and the Office of Legislative Research, there were concerns raised regarding federal fair housing laws. And it was for that reason, because we had not worked through that, we did not hear the bill at that time. It was heard in housing. You and I have had some conversation, and I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that because there are still some questions from folks within our nonpartisan offices about how this would impact and relate with federal fair housing law, which I'm not an expert in, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on that.
Thank you. I think that is a really important question. I'm really glad you brought it up, Representative, because Obviously, a cursory view of any legislation that talks about zoning and keeping anybody out, everybody's red flag should go up, fair housing violation. If you continue to read through what the distinction is, where anything that would fall under a fair housing protection has to be considered a dwelling, has to be considered a residence, has to be considered a place that somebody calls home. And we've clearly identified through the means that the Office of Health Strategy has allowed us to, what is a home and what isn't. So anything that's considered a healthcare facility that would require a certificate of need has already been designed to not be a residence. It's not a home. It's not entitled to fair housing protection. It would be the equivocal, example of somebody saying, well, I would like to open a motel and ask for fair housing exemption when nobody's staying there longer than a few days, maybe even, maybe you have a month-long tenant. But it's not apples to oranges. It goes back to the fact that we're talking about fair housing protection is intended to protect where somebody lives. It's where somebody calls home. It's where somebody goes to for permanent shelter, rest, and ability to live safely. That's not to argue. I'm not going to, sit here and be naive that's saying that for the time that those individuals are at these facilities, they may be considering that their safe place. But the reality is they're never intended to stay there permanently, indefinitely, or long term. In fact, it would completely violate any insurance reimbursement if they did, as we all know with hospital discharge situations. So you can only stay at a short-term recovery so long before they're literally kicking you out. It's not the same type of thing that has ever been afforded fair housing. And I would argue to say it would be a completely brand new argument if the Supreme Court ever had to hear it in the fair housing application for a model like this, for something that is so drastically different than things that have ever been protected for residential purpose. I would even go further to say that the way that we have the loophole in it now that's being abused by corporate entities to do this, because of the municipality cap of the 0.01% of the population being capped at how many group homes we have, we are actually harming the fair housing protection of people that need it for the proper group homes. And that was really the whole spirit of this bill. You have individuals that need access to a true group home where they're going to live long-term. They need that safe protection and they need to be free from discrimination in applying for it. If we've capped them at a percentage that these individuals are now allowed to come in and charge exorbitant amounts of money to be in that number, we are therefore implicating the number of true group homes that can exist in a municipality. It's the reverse. We're actually almost perpetuating violation of fair housing by leaving it without a clarification.
Thank you, Ms. McClote. And again, thank you for the time that you've invested into this. You've certainly, I know, learned a lot and articulated a lot for a lot of us in the community and here today at the committee. And I appreciate that. Are there, Senator Cassano, my apologies. Your hand was blending into one of those shirts in the background. My apologies, Senator Cassano.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to listen to the discussion. I'm kind of reminiscing here. I can remember Denise Merrill and I in 1970 or 71 working to close Mansfield Training School with a long-term vision that we would be able to provide housing and so on for many of those clients who lived in this captured environment. And it has worked out well, but the problem is it has maybe worked so well, the group home process, that we have people now trying to take advantage of it. Simple example, Fairfield, we're talking Fairfield University exists. Can 6 students live in a neighborhood and call it a group home? And try to get supplemental funding and so on. Lots of ways to try to abuse lots of rules and regulations. And so on the one hand, group home structure, I have 56 last count I knew here just in Manchester. Much of that is because we have a very active program working with people with disabilities. Mark Inc. is an amazing part of our community, and this community has adopted them for over 80 years ago. And it's a great relationship. And when I see attempts to abuse what is already in place that is working, that's when I start to worry. Because we can take 6 students from a college university, this or that, anything, and quote, call it a group home, as well as what's happening here in this situation. So we need to provide protections to what we already have in place And if it gets abused, then there'll be a second and a third and a fourth abuse, and it could lead to the whole ending of the group home program, which is it's a lifeline for literally thousands of people in this state. So this is not just a proposal before planning and development. It has much longer ramifications, and we have to be careful with it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator
We
Cassano.
run I just want to say, I think Senator Cassano really touched on the fact that we're running the risk of harming the very people that this legislation was intended to protect. And there's a reason why there's a protection for people that are unfortunately faced with discriminatory practices, because they're inalienable rights, right? And if we're allowing that to be abused by somebody that doesn't need that fundamental protection, we've completely eviscerated the entire purpose of the legislation. And we run the risk of entirely detrimentally impacting the people it needs to protect. And that's why I really want to close. I know I've taken up a lot of everyone's time. I want to close by saying that it's just critically imperative that we clarify this through Senate Bill 868. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McClote. Seeing no further questions, I want to thank you for being here with us today and wish you a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Next on our list, I believe we have with us Mr. Justin Spencer, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Spencer, if you could join us by, oh, there you go, turning on your video, which you did. Welcome, please proceed, Mr. Spencer.
All right, thanks for having me. First and foremost, I want to thank the committee members for this opportunity today. Today, I'm speaking to you as a AAA zone resident in strong favor of Senate Bill 868. I'm going to try to make this simple. Medical facilities, whether for-profit or not, are simply not group homes. To try to take a bit of a human approach with my testimony, like Dr. Siegel mentioned earlier, I have a close experience as a loved one, my aunt who suffered from mental illness, and I know firsthand the importance of group homes and what that means to a community. Out of the handful she's lived in over decades, helping her move in and out, these were truly her home. She brought her own bed, brought her own television, her own personal belongings. This was her home. She created very special bonds with her roommates, celebrating holidays, birthdays, and all other special occasions. They attended local high school sporting events, volunteer in town activities, and they were a visible part of the town in which they were residing. The state statute 8.3E appears to be currently flawed, as medical facilities are utilizing loopholes in Connecticut to not only undercut the state, but do detrimental damage to actual group homes, giving our residents care, not out-of-state residents, which some of these companies are trying to facilitate, and create a safe environment where that can lead to a peaceful lifestyle. It appears corporate entities have identified the state of Connecticut as a very lucrative opportunity, a place where they term community residents can be taken advantage of. But profits aside, again, these are not residential homes, they're not sober living homes, and they're certainly not intended to be anything close to a long-term complex. By operating in the model that has been mentioned today, the 30 to 90 day stay under this medical facility simply do not fall in this category. They receive no funding from DEMIS, and they require a certificate of need. I strongly believe that Bill 868 fixes that. This is not just being abused by one entity or a few, but is being abused by dozens of corporations that we've highlighted in Connecticut, and there's a clear definition that lacks enforcement of such usage. If we don't deal with this now, as Ms. McClote mentioned earlier, things are only going to get worse. My hope is that Bill 868 provides a necessary definition to the clarity of Section 8.3E, such as the abuse does not have disproportionate impact on the very population that it serves. As we know, Connecticut has a population dictated percentage threshold that only sets a specific limit of group homes in a specific town or county, which Mr. Barron mentioned a little earlier. As such, the for-profit medical treatment facilities are competing against the disabled population that we're trying to support and that 8.3E is trying to protect. I also want to be very clear in my testimony that I support medical treatment facilities, and they're very much needed, obviously, in our time today, but they are not group homes, and we really need to further distinguish the two. Clarity and definition is paramount in what we need to do. Personally, I'd like to be spending more time learning about ways to help support members of the community that are facing these issues, rather than dealing with attorneys and lobbyists from highly funded private equity firms. I thank everyone for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer, and it's nice to see you today and have you here with us. Senator
Good
Wong.
to see you as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Spencer, what is this percentage cap on group homes that you referenced, and how will it impact availability of group homes for those that need it, like the protected group and that is intended? Can you articulate that a little bit?
Yeah, I believe it's 0.01% of the municipality population. So in Fairfield, with just over 60,000, that would equate to about 60 group homes. I'm a little unclear on how many group homes are here actually in Fairfield town or in Fairfield County or in the state. I'm unsure of those statistics.
Now, just following up on Senator Cassano, who I greatly respect, and as the chair of this committee as well, he talked about some, the example of possible loophole abuses. Can you cite in regards to one example that was cited earlier in regards to a residence owner in your neighborhood that has a child that's impacted by a protected disability, that if these kind of loopholes were allowed to continue, that they would actually preclude that family's desire to convert their home residence into a group home in that community because of the percentage cap? Can you just give a real life example how these kind of loopholes are really hurting the intended protected classes that we're trying to promote and support and be an integral part of our community?
Absolutely. Someone that we've been in contact with and have got to know over the now years without disclosing her name. They live in Fairfield, and if the said house goes through, they have a son who's, I believe, 18 or 19 years old, and he is severely disabled. And their life goal was to, they spent all their savings on this house to create a safe haven environment off a busy or off a road. And really the goal there was, when they pass away many years down the line, that their son will have the opportunity to live out the rest of his life in a group home. That is the definition, I think, of what we're talking about with a group home. So the knowledge that they have when they're nearing the end of their life, that they're unable to open their house because a group home, air quotes, is across the street, will be just detrimental and something I can't even imagine living with.
Thank you for that human element for this issue, because we can get very much bogged down in the what we talk about in this building sometimes, but the human element and the eloquence in which Senator Cassano articulated that these loopholes are hurting the very people that we're trying to protect and integrate into our community as a noble goal is indeed hurt by it. So thank you for bringing that human element into this conversation. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence again. Thank you, Justin.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you. Do you know of any towns that have reached their limit on group homes?
I do not, because I think that I'm not familiar with specific laws, but I think there are ways that companies and/or group homes cannot identify themselves within towns, but I don't have any set data to back that up, so I'm a little unsure.
And would this legislation affect any for-profit medical facilities that have already been built, sited, whatever?
Say that one more time.
Would this have any retroactive effect? That is, a medical facility that slid into a neighborhood on the AD that really wouldn't be permitted in the future. Would it be grandfathered so it wouldn't be removed due to a retroactive application of a civil law?
Got it. Yeah. So absolutely not. This wouldn't have any retro effect. It's not part of this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Seeing no further questions from members of the committee, I thank you for being with us today, Mr. Spencer. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You do the same.
Next on our list is Patrick McMahon. Mr. McMahon, if you can join us by turning on your microphone and your camera. I believe Mr. McMahon is with us. Mr. McMahon, I think your microphone is off, but your camera is not on. Are you able to turn on your camera?
I'm working on it. Why don't I'll start with the testimony.
Wonderful. Well, would you like to just have a moment? Feel free to do that.
There we go.
There you are. And boy, it's wonderful to see you, Mr. McMahon. It's been a while.
It is great to see you as well, Representative McCarthy Vahey. And thank you for this opportunity. Good afternoon, Senator Cassano, Senator Wong, Representative Zullo, and the distinguished members of the Planning and Development Committee. I'm here to support House Bill 6418 concerning abandoned and blighted property receivership. I'm Patrick McMahon. I'm the CEO of the Connecticut Main Street Center. We're a statewide nonprofit organization working to drive investment to downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts. Since I began as CEO of Connecticut Main Street Center, I've visited over 100 of our 169 communities, and I can assure you that we have hundreds of vacant and abandoned buildings located in communities large and small and in every county in Connecticut. Prior to taking over at Connecticut Main Street Center, I was a local economic developer in the towns of Windsor, Windsor Locks, and Suffield, all of which were under 35,000 in population. We would really have benefited from having the receivership tool in our development efforts. It was often frustrating for us local officials, both elected, appointed, and staff, when a building owner wouldn't invest in their property, would have it boarded up, and would really take no steps to bring it back into productive use. Often we would have to wait through a lengthy foreclosure action, or in many cases, we'd have to wait till a change of ownership in total, which could be years in the making, sometimes several decades, before we would see any meaningful change. In my written testimony, I mentioned that there are 2 vacant houses directly across the street from Suffield Town Hall. There's a crosswalk right at that location. It was in our village district, and these 2 houses could easily have been quaint shops or housing units. Instead, they sat there vacant, boarded up, and there was really nothing that we could do, because it meant being boarded up and safe. It was not anything that we could move forward with. In neighboring Windsor Locks, they devastated their downtown through urban renewal, knocked down many historic buildings, and then there was tremendous disinvestment. Some of the remaining buildings ended up becoming vacant and blighting influences on the downtown. It would have been wonderful for us to have the receivership legislation at that time to try to get those back into productive use. Those properties are very close to the train station that's going to be part of the Hartford line. So if we were able at that time to try to secure those and get those in the right direction, that would have been great. You know, a lot of times in some of our older historic downtowns, we're really trying to change the narrative. And having blighted buildings certainly impacts our ability to show a positive trajectory for investment. As you heard earlier from Donna Hamsey, one of our member communities, Torrington, is taking advantage of the receivership legislation now to address a very prominent historic building in the downtown, the Yankee Peddler Inn on Main Street. It's very close to the Warner Theater. That property has an out-of-state owner. There's been frozen pipes, code compliance failures, vandalism, and it's required over 90 municipal service calls. Through my experience, older and historic buildings like this can deteriorate very quickly. You have a roof leak and the building can be gone in just a couple of years. It's important that towns be proactive and have access to tools like the receivership to tackle problem properties. I would highly urge this committee and the General Assembly to move forward to allow communities of less than $35,000 to avail themselves of this important economic and community development tool, as well as a health and safety tool. With that, open it to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMahon, not just for your testimony today, which I, as you probably heard earlier, am very excited about hearing because I'm a big proponent of this legislation, but also for your work for our main streets all across the state. And I have, although I missed the last meeting of our Main Street Caucus, hope to be joining you again and continuing the conversation. Perhaps we can connect actually after this hearing today. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me put on my video. And thank you, Mr. McMahon, for your testimony. I think if I understood you correctly, what I take from at least the latter part of your statements is that this particular bill, if it becomes law, would be a pretty valuable tool in the effort to sort of halt or delay sort of demolition by neglect, which I think is a pretty common situation in many of these, many downtowns as a way to get around certain protections that either the state or towns have put in place for some of these historic kinds of properties. And I just want to ask you for your thoughts on that, and how valuable do you see it if it does have value in that aspect? And is it something that would allow you to perhaps act sooner than you'd otherwise be able to? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Representative. So we actually held a statewide conference on adaptive reuse of historic and older buildings, and the importance of older buildings that can be reutilized. There's energy already embodied into these buildings. They often have significant character. If we can get them to be reutilized while the structure is still in a safe state of affairs, it's really important. And based on my experience, water is the biggest issue. If water starts to penetrate, or if vandals start to get into the buildings, they became a health and safety risk across the country. Firefighters are injured and sometimes die more regularly in a vacant building than in any building that is actually occupied. We are really, the whole reason why we had that statewide summit was to try to move forward with some of these abandoned and vacant properties in a quicker pace. Because once they're lost, often, to be honest with you, in these downtowns, they end up becoming just a lot that will sit there as a lot, potentially for parking, potentially with just weeds for years upon years, instead of being sort of an active, productive building that adds to the fabric of the downtown.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. McMahon, thank you for your leadership on, and I love the name of your organization in reflecting Main Street, particularly in these type of difficult COVID times where economic struggles on our Main Street. It is a compliment to the great work that your organization does. Now, in talking about some of these incredibly beautiful properties, in some cases, this kind of a new initiative is kind of also a preservation as well as an economic revitalization effort. You are actively engaged with local government and leaders in trying to facilitate this. Is that correct?
That is correct. We work with the municipal CEOs, the town planners, the economic development directors. We're also very hooked into the commercial development world, architects, engineers, bankers, financiers, and we're trying to put the pieces in the puzzle together. And a tool like the receivership is just another thing, another quiver that would help us move some of these projects forward. And the preservation angle is absolutely critical. In addition to this legislation in the land banks and brownfields, I put a shout out to the State Historic Preservation Office and the state historic rehabilitation tax credits, which are absolutely critical in some of these historic building redevelopments.
And I do agree that it is a critical situation that we need to address in our towns and economic districts. But you couldn't imagine doing this without local collaboration and local input. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wong. I thought I saw another hand up a moment ago. I may have missed that. Mr. McMahon, I appreciate you also referencing brownfields, which were earlier referenced today, and the tax credits. And it again speaks to the fact that in order to address these issues that we're facing, there are so many different things that we need to do. And this would be one of the many that we would get to do. I have one, I thought I saw a hand. Representative Michelle.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a little concern, and again, I'm not very super aware of every detail of the bill, but my concern is sometimes properties that are left to rot, quote unquote, like historical properties are often bought by developers that do this intentionally so that they can build anything they want on top of it, or to replace that structure. Is there anything regarding that aspect, and what's your position on this, Mr. McMahon? Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Well, this gives you this legislation gives you the opportunity to go to court and get a receiver appointed. So you would have the opportunity to go before that judge and say it's a neighboring property owner or a community nonprofit that's looking to be the receiver. I'm certain that the court is going to want to know what is the experience and capacity of that organization or that property owner to be appointed the receiver.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. McMahon. The reason why I mentioned that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stamford, but we have the Henry Street houses, and then we have the Pickensdorfer. They destroyed the annex, and I maybe I'm wrong, but I think that it's going to go towards probably partial demolition. But that's why I probably have a particular situation in Stamford, but I appreciate your time today.
We do have a board member on Connecticut Main Street who is the planner for Stamford, so I'd love to follow up with you on a specific question.
Please, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Michelle. And Mr. McMahon, I want to just go back to one word that you used in describing the downtown area. You talked about character, which is a word that's certainly one we're going to be discussing more in this committee. And just to give you a chance to define that, when I heard you say that, I believe that I would take it to mean you were referring to the architectural features and uniqueness of the building. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, Representative. Yes.
Thank you. And it's so true. You know, preserving our history is such an important part of what we do. And we know that it helps our communities be economically vibrant. And certainly as someone from Fairfield, our history is so important here. And we want to be able to preserve and protect that and give our communities these tools. Seeing no further questions from members of the committee, I just want to thank you so much again for your work and for being with us today, Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Representative, and the committee. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Next on our list, we have Mr. John Filczak. Mr. Clerk is, I believe, Mr. Filczak. Yes, he is with us. We see you, and now we can hear you. Please proceed, Mr. Filczak. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. Good to see you all. My name is John Filczak. I'm the Executive Director of the Northeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and I'm here today to comment on Raised Bill 870, and that concerning the recommendations of the Office of Policy and Management, and specifically Section 7, which deals with a change to use in the revaluation schedule and using COG boundaries as new revaluation zones. I am also part of the OPM-led working group that developed this proposal. And NECOG does support the proposal and urges your favorable consideration on it. Revaluation is of a particular interest to NECOG because we operate a regional revaluation program, which we began in 2010 and is still the only one in the state. In fact, we just began the third 5-year cycle of the program. And for our towns, it's been very beneficial, including a few towns outside of NECOG. Our towns, by and large, are small with small parcel counts. They go down to several have fewer than 800 parcels. Our current total number of parcels in our program is about 32,000, which many communities by themselves have more than that across the state. So our going regional provides us an economy of scale. Like all our programs, it's voluntary. And we have realized significant reduced costs for our towns. We've also freed our towns up from the RFP development process. We have the assessors involved in the technical elements of the RFP. We handle all of the contract development and negotiations, all administrative and fiduciary functions, freeing that up from the towns. We take no administrative fee from that. It's all covered by their general assessment fee for being part of NECOG. And it's helped the towns by having a common set of revaluation professionals in place in the region doing all of the towns together. It's added consistency there. So we had some initial concerns that this approach could hurt our program. But after participating with a working group with OPM, we're now confident that this in fact won't hurt our program, that it'll actually complement it. So we hope that you support it, and we hope that other regions in the state can take on a regional or shared approach to revaluation. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Filczek, and thank you for staying here with us and your patience. I find it valuable to have you here to chime in. I had asked Mr. Heft earlier in testimony, and you may have heard that, what kind of input and engagement there was from around the community or from the communities around the state. So I appreciate hearing firsthand from you, your involvement and even your initial hesitation and being able to work through that with the working group. Are there questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, it looks like Mr. Filczek, you're getting off easily today. That may not be the case the next time you come, just fair warning.
I have a feeling not.
Well, we're happy to have you here and grateful for the work that you and all the rest of our COGs around the state are doing for our municipalities. Have a great weekend. And the last person on our list today is Arlene Carpenter. Mr. Clerk, is Ms. Carpenter here with us?
If I'm not mistaken, no ma'am. No ma'am.
Okay, I just if I may, just to go back through our list of folks who had signed up to testify. Obviously things change, and sometimes, as we learned today, people believe they have to sign up to testify in order to be able to listen in. But I just want to make sure, Mr. Clerk, that none of the following people are here and wanting to testify. William Gaffney, Barbara Mayer, Kathy Flaherty, Rick Hart, Rob Powers, Katie Montgomery, Cynthia Kinney, or Arlene Carpenter. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If that is the case, then we are through our speakers for today. Are there any closing remarks from my co-chair, Senator Cassano, or our ranking members, Senator Wong and Zullo? Senator Cassano?
Yes, I want you to know that we have done a terrific job with our distinguished leader, and transportation is on their 6th or 7th, and they have a list of 50 to go. So if you're on transportation, you haven't missed anything.
Oh, thank you for the heads up, Senator Cassano. I think I'll be seeing you in that Zoom very shortly.
I think a few of you will be. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. Great job.
Senator Wong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to extend and echo Chairman Casano and thank you for your leadership on managing the committee and public hearing process. I've said it before and it bears repeating. I appreciate your opportunity to give all the speakers an engagement and allow members of this committee and myself an opportunity to articulate some thoughts and ideas. So I just wanted to offer my heartfelt appreciation and gratitude for your leadership on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wong. It's a team effort. And Rep. Zullo, any final words?
I'll just point out that it was great to hear a lot of different perspectives today. It really helped to better understand a lot of the proposals before us. You don't really appreciate the diversity of perspectives, so you really start to hear everyone speaking. And so it was very helpful. And thank you again to our clerk and again for your leadership in administering today's hearing.
Thank you. And Mr. Clerk, I was just looking up to look at our next date. I believe that the next date on the calendar for us will be would be Friday, March 5th. I'm just looking down at my notes. Am I correct in that, Mr. Clerk?
Let me triple check on that one. I believe you're correct.
Committee members, we will get you confirmation of that date. And here I am trying to make March next week. We don't need to speed things up anymore. Just for 1 second pause, just to see, Mr. Clerk, if I was correct in that.
Yeah, Word documents just opening up.
Thank you.
What was the date you said? March 1st?
Friday, March 5th, I believe, is our next scheduled hearing.
That's the next scheduled hearing, correct? And then we do have a meeting on the 1st.
So we will get you information, but just for public hearing purposes, the 5th will be our next scheduled meeting or hearing, excuse me. Okay, thank you so much to all of you for your time today. Thanks to all the members of the public who testified and joined us and shared their insights. It was very illuminating and we appreciate you. Have a great weekend, everyone.